When a starving widow collapsed at the gate of Wyoming's richest rancher begging him to take her children, she never expected his answer to change everything. "I'll take you too," he said. 3 words that would ignite a scandal, defy a town's judgment, and transform loss into the most unexpected love story the frontier had ever seen. This is their journey from desperation to belonging. Stay until the end to see how their courage rewrote their destiny, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind that February morning carried more than cold. It carried the scent of desperation. Margaret Lane had learned to recognize that smell in the 3 months since influenza had stolen her husband, Thomas, leaving her with 2 children, $17, and a future that seemed to narrow with each passing day until it resembled nothing more than a coffin's worth of darkness. She stood now at the iron gate of the Cole Ranch, her fingers, once soft, now raw and cracked, gripping the cold metal bars like a prisoner might grip the door to freedom. Behind her, pressed against her threadbare skirts, were Anna and Luke. 7 and 5 years old respectively, they had stopped asking when they would eat a real meal. That silence frightened Margaret more than their previous crying ever had. The February sun hung low and weak in the Wyoming sky, offering light but no warmth. Ice crystals formed delicate patterns on the fence posts, beautiful and merciless in their perfection. Margaret's breath came in visible clouds, each exhalation a small ghost of the life she was trying desperately to preserve. She had walked 4 miles. 4 miles through snow that sometimes reached her knees, carrying Luke when his small legs gave out, holding Anna's hand when the girl stumbled. 4 miles to beg a man she'd never spoken to, had only seen from a distance at Sunday services, to take the only things in this world she truly loved. The Cole Ranch sprawled before her like a kingdom. 12,000 acres of prime grazing land, herds that numbered in the thousands, barns that could house 50 horses in comfort. The main house stood 3 stories tall, white clapboard with hunter green shutters, smoke rising from multiple chimneys promising warmth she could barely remember. Fences stretched in perfect lines toward horizons she couldn't see. Every post stood straight. Every gate hung true. It was a monument to order in a world that had shown her nothing but chaos since October. Margaret had sold everything. The furniture Thomas had built with his own hands, gone to pay the doctor who couldn't save him. Her mother's silver, gone to pay for the burial. Her wedding dress, carefully preserved, the lace her grandmother had tatted, gone to pay for 3 weeks of flour and beans that were now nothing but memory. She'd sold everything except her wedding ring and the clothes they wore. And now she stood at the final gate with the final thing left to trade, her dignity. A door opened on the main house. Margaret's heart, already racing, seemed to stop entirely. Harrison Cole stepped onto the wide porch, a man who commanded space simply by occupying it. 6'3", broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvering at the temples. 42 years old, though grief had carved lines that added years to his face. He wore black trousers, suspenders over a white shirt despite the cold, sleeves rolled to his elbows as if winter itself wouldn't dare touch him. He'd been heading to the barn, but something, perhaps some sixth sense developed in years of watching for wolves, for rustlers, for danger, made him pause. His head turned. Even from 70 yards, Margaret saw the moment he noticed them. He changed direction. Margaret watched him approach, each step measured, unhurried. A man who owned time as surely as he owned land. She had rehearsed what she would say, practiced the words 100 times during the long walk, but now her throat constricted around them, holding them hostage behind pride that even poverty couldn't quite kill. He reached the gate. Up close, his eyes were gray. Not the soft gray of mourning doves, but the hard gray of flint, capable of striking sparks or starting fires. Yet something in them, some flicker of recognition or perhaps remembrance, kept her from turning away. "Mrs. Lane." His voice was deep, roughened by years of calling orders across open ranges. He remembered her name. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or embarrassed. "Mr. Cole." Her voice cracked despite her determination. She felt Anna's small hand tighten in her skirt, Luke's face press harder against her leg. I need to speak with you. Please." He didn't make her wait. He opened the gate himself, the hinges moving silently. Even the gates on Harrison Cole's ranch were well maintained. "Come up to the house." "No." The word burst from her before she could stop it. No, I can't. I won't take up your time or track mud into your home. I need to ask you something. He studied her for a long moment. She wondered what he saw. A woman of 28 who looked 40? A widow with hollow cheeks and eyes that had forgotten how to hope? A mother clutching two children like drowning swimmers clutch debris? At least come to the porch, he said finally. The wind's bitter. It was bitter. Margaret hadn't realized how bitter until the possibility of relief presented itself. She nodded, unable to speak, and led her children through the gate Harrison held open. The walk to the house felt eternal. Her shoes, more whole than leather now, crunched on gravel that was somehow cleaner than any street in town. Luke stumbled once, and before Margaret could catch him, Harrison had swept the boy into his arms as naturally as breathing. "Got you, son," he murmured, and something in Margaret's chest both broke and mended at once. The porch steps were solid, the wood recently repaired. The porch itself wrapped around the entire house, wide enough for rocking chairs and flower boxes that would bloom come spring. Harrison set Luke down gently and leaned against the railing, waiting. Margaret forced herself to meet his eyes, to say the words that had been destroying her for weeks. "I can't feed them." Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the winter stillness, it carried like a shout. "I've tried everything. I took in washing, but there's no work. I tried to sew, but I have no machine, and my stitching by hand can't compete with the women in town who have proper equipment. I went to the church, but Reverend Matthews said charity must go to those who've shown moral fortitude, and apparently being unable to pay my rent lacks sufficient fortitude." Bitterness crept into her tone. She stopped, swallowed, continued. "Mr. Cole, these children deserve better than what I can provide. They deserve to eat every day. They deserve warmth. They deserve a future." Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I'm asking you to take them. Anna's good with numbers and reading. Luke's young, but he's strong and eager to learn. They'll work hard. I'll sign whatever papers you need, give up any claim." "No!" The word hit her like a physical blow. She'd prepared for negotiation, for conditions, for demands. She hadn't prepared for simple refusal. "Please." Now the tears came, hot and humiliating. "Please, I'm begging you. They're good children. They won't cause trouble. I know it's asking too much, but I have nowhere else." "Mrs. Lane." His voice was gentle but firm, cutting through her pleading. "I said no to taking just your children. I'll take you too." The world stopped. Wind ceased its howling. The sun paused its weak journey across the sky. Even the smoke from the chimneys seemed to freeze mid-rise. Margaret stared at him, certain she'd misheard, certain that cold and hunger had finally pushed her mind into hallucination. "What?" "All three of you." Harrison straightened from the railing, and she realized he was being careful, moving slowly as if approaching a wild creature that might bolt. "Tonight. There's rooms in the east wing that haven't been used in years. Rosa, my housekeeper, she'll get them ready. You'll eat a proper meal, rest. We'll figure out the details tomorrow." I can't." Words failed her entirely. "Sir, I came to ask you to take my children, not to give us charity." "It's not charity." Something flickered across his face, pain, memory, something old and deep. "It's an offer of employment. I need someone to help Rosa with the house, someone to keep my ledgers straight. My last bookkeeper quit 3 weeks ago and the accounts are a mess. Someone to teach any of the hands who want to learn their letters. Can you do those things?" "Yes." The answer came automatically. "Yes, I can do all of that, but then it's not charity. It's work. Honest work for honest pay plus room and board." He glanced down at Luke and Anna, who were staring at him with eyes huge as saucers. "These two will earn their keep too. Age-appropriate chores, nothing that'll break them. Anna, you know your numbers?" Anna nodded, mute. "Good. You can help your mother with the accounts. Luke, you like animals?" "Yes, sir." Luke's voice was tiny but eager. "The barn cats just had kittens. They need someone to feed them scraps and make sure they don't get into trouble. Think you can handle that?" "Yes, sir." Now Luke's voice carried genuine excitement. the first Margaret had heard from him in weeks. Margaret's legs suddenly felt unreliable. She reached for the porch railing, gripping it to stay upright. "Mr. Cole, I don't understand. Why would you do this? You don't know us. We're nothing to you. I came here to beg, not to—" "You came here because you're a good mother who'd swallow her pride to save her children." Harrison's gray eyes held hers, and in them she saw something she recognized: loss that had carved canyons, loneliness that echoed in empty rooms. "I'm offering because I have space no one's using and work that needs doing. Nothing more complicated than that." But it was more complicated. Margaret could feel it in the air between them, heavy with unspoken things. Still, she was drowning, and he'd thrown a rope. Only a fool would refuse to grab hold. "When?" she whispered. "Now." He pushed away from the railing, decisive. "Wait here." He disappeared into the house, leaving them alone on the porch. Margaret sank onto the top step, her legs finally giving out. Anna sat beside her, small body pressed against her mother's side. Luke stood uncertainly, staring at the barn where mysterious kittens apparently awaited. "Mama?" Anna's voice was small. "Is it real? Are we really staying here?" "I think so, baby. I think so." "Will we eat tonight?" The question shattered something in Margaret's chest. "Yes. Yes, we'll eat tonight." The door opened again. Harrison emerged, followed by a woman in her 50s, Rosa, presumably, who wore a practical gray dress covered by a white apron. Her face was weathered but kind, her dark hair streaked with white and pulled into a neat bun. "Madre de Dios," Rosa breathed, taking in the three figures on the porch. "Harrison, why didn't you bring them inside immediately?" "Bringing them inside now," he replied mildly. "Rosa, this is Mrs. Margaret Lane and her children, Anna and Luke. They'll be staying with us. Can you prepare the blue room in the nursery?" Already on it, Rosa descended the steps and took Margaret's hands in hers. Warm hands, strong hands. "Come, Senora, let's get you out of this wind. There's stew on the stove, fresh bread, and apple pie from yesterday. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning." Margaret's voice was barely audible. "Bread? A little dried beef." Rosa's expression tightened. "And the children?" "The same." "Idiota," Rosa muttered, whether at Margaret or the world in general was unclear. "Come. Now." She tugged Margaret to her feet with surprising strength and shooed all three of them toward the door. Harrison held it open and they passed through into warmth that felt like absolution. The interior of the house struck Margaret immediately. Not because of its size, though it was large, but because of its emptiness. Oh, the furniture was there. Solid pieces, well-made, expensive. But there was a quality to the space, a sense of rooms waiting for sounds they no longer heard. Pictures hung on the walls, but they were landscapes, careful, neutral choices. No family portraits, no personal photographs, just beautiful, impersonal vistas. A house that had been lived in, but was no longer a home. "This way." Rosa led them through a hallway paneled in dark wood, past a parlor that looked like it had never been used, toward the back of the house where warmth and cooking smells grew stronger. "The kitchen first. We feed you, then we worry about rooms and rest." The kitchen was enormous. A cast-iron stove that could cook for an army, a work table that could seat 10, copper pots hanging from ceiling hooks catching lamplight and glowing like small suns. But more importantly, on that stove sat a pot of stew that smelled like heaven, and on the table sat a loaf of bread so fresh Margaret could see steam rising when Rosa cut into it. "Sit." Rosa pointed at the table. "All of you." They sat. Harrison leaned against the door frame, watching but not intruding. Rosa moved with practiced efficiency, ladling stew into bowls, cutting thick slices of bread, pouring milk from a pitcher so cold condensation beaded on its surface. She set the food before them, and Margaret watched her children stare at their bowls like they'd seen a miracle. "Eat slowly," Margaret warned. "Small bites. Your stomachs aren't used to—" But they were already eating, too hungry for caution. Margaret reached for her own spoon with shaking hands. The first bite of stew, rich with beef, potatoes, carrots, herbs she couldn't name, nearly undid her completely. It was food, real food, hot and plentiful, and here. She ate slowly, forcing herself to follow her own advice, even as her body screamed for more. Beside her, Anna and Luke ate with single-minded focus, and Margaret watched them, watched color slowly return to their cheeks, watched the tight lines around their mouths ease fraction by fraction. Rosa stood by the stove, arms crossed, satisfaction on her weathered face. Harrison remained by the door, and when Margaret glanced at him, she found him watching not her but the children, his expression unreadable. "More," Rosa said when their bowls were empty. It wasn't a question. "We couldn't," Margaret began. "You could. You will." Rosa was already ladling more stew. "Your bodies need rebuilding. This will take time. Tonight we start." They ate second helpings. Luke asked for third, his small voice hesitant, and Rosa gave it with a smile that transformed her stern face. Margaret couldn't manage more, but she ate another slice of bread with butter, real butter, not the lard she'd been unable to afford, and felt something in her chest loosen incrementally. When they finally finished, when even Luke had leaned back with a sigh of fullness, Rosa nodded. "Now we see to rooms." She led them up a wide staircase to the second floor, down a hallway lined with doors that remained closed. At the end, she opened two doors side by side. "This is the blue room," she told Margaret, gesturing to the first door. "It has not been used in some time, but I keep it clean. The bed is good. The fireplace draws well." Margaret stepped inside and had to stop in the doorway. The room was larger than her entire previous house. A four-poster bed dominated the space, covered in a quilt of blues and whites that looked handmade and exquisite. A fireplace stood ready with wood stacked beside it. A dresser, a wardrobe, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, even a small writing desk by the window. And this, Rosa continued, opening the second door, was the nursery. The children's room was equally spacious, but clearly designed for younger occupants. Two small beds stood on opposite walls, each with its own quilt. A toy chest sat under the window. A shelf held books, their spines bright with color. And in the corner, a rocking horse with painted eyes seemed to watch them enter. Luke walked straight to the rocking horse and touched it with reverent fingers. "Mama, look." "I see, baby." Margaret's throat was too tight for more words. "There are clothes in the wardrobe," Rosa said quietly. "They may need altering, but they will do for now. I'll bring hot water for washing. The privy is downstairs and out back, but there are chamber pots under the beds. Tomorrow, I'll show you everything properly. Tonight, you just rest." "Rosa." Margaret finally found her voice. "Why are these rooms ready? You couldn't have known we were coming." Rosa's expression softened. "I keep many rooms ready, Senora. Harrison, he does not like to see closed doors and dusty spaces. He says a house should always be ready to welcome people, even if people do not come. Even if people do not come." The words hung heavy with implication, with history Margaret didn't know but could sense. "I'll bring the hot water," Rosa said, and left them alone in the nursery. Anna was examining the books, running her fingers along their spines with a wonder that broke Margaret's heart. Luke had climbed onto the rocking horse and was gently making it move, his eyes huge. Neither child seemed able to believe this was real. Margaret couldn't believe it either. She walked back to the blue room, to the window that overlooked the ranch's western pastures. The sun was setting now, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against white ground. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse where ranch hands would be finishing their own dinner, preparing for another night. This was Harrison Cole's kingdom, a kingdom he'd offered to share with three desperate strangers. Why? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find Harrison in the doorway, a stack of folded fabric in his arms. "Night clothes," he said. "Rosa dug them out. They were—" He paused, something crossing his face. "They'll fit." "Mr. Cole." Margaret stepped toward him, needing answers before she could accept this strange salvation. "Please, tell me why you're doing this. The truth." He set the night clothes on the bed, taking his time, and when he looked at her, his gray eyes held a weariness that matched her own. 5 years ago, he said quietly, I had a wife named Catherine and a son named Benjamin. Ben was 3 years old. That summer, scarlet fever came through the county. Catherine got sick first. She died in 4 days. Ben died 2 days after. Margaret's hand rose to her throat. I'm so sorry. Everyone's sorry. His voice held no bitterness, just statement of fact. Sorry doesn't bring them back. Sorry doesn't fill the rooms they left empty. Sorry doesn't stop time from passing while I'm still here and they're not. He moved to the window, stood beside her looking out at the sunset. This house holds 60 people easily. Now it holds 2, me and Rosa. The silence is, he trailed off, shook his head. When I saw you at the gate, saw your children, I heard Catherine's voice. She always said if we were blessed with plenty, we had an obligation to share it. She'd be furious with me for letting this house stay empty while people suffered. So this is for her, Margaret understood now. To honor her memory. Partially. He glanced at her and something in his expression was raw, unguarded. But also because when you said you'd give up your children to save them, I saw the kind of love that doesn't calculate cost. The kind Catherine had. The kind I haven't seen in 5 years. And I thought, he stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. I thought maybe filling this house with that kind of love would be good. For all of us. Tears slipped down Margaret's cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. We'll work hard. I promise you. Whatever you need, I know you will. He turned from the window. But tonight, just rest. Tomorrow's soon enough for work. Tomorrow's soon enough for everything except sleep and safety. He left then, pulling the door closed behind him, and Margaret stood alone in the blue room as darkness fell beyond the window. From the nursery, she heard Luke's delighted laugh as Anna apparently said something funny. She heard Rosa's footsteps on the stairs, bringing the promised hot water. She walked to the bed and sat on its edge, feeling the give of a real mattress, the softness of clean linens. She thought of the 4-mile walk that morning, of the desperation that had driven her to beg, of the moment when Harrison Cole had said words that changed everything. I'll take you too. Not charity, not pity, but recognition. One soul glimpsing another and choosing not to look away. Margaret lay back on the bed, just for a moment, just to feel what rest might be like. The quilt smelled of lavender and cedar. The pillow cradled her head with a gentleness she'd forgotten existed. Through the wall, she heard her children settling into their own beds, their voices soft with wonder. For the first time in 3 months, Margaret Lane let herself believe that perhaps they might survive. That perhaps in this house of echoes and memories, they might find something none of them had dared hope for. A future. A home. A second chance at the life that winter and illness had stolen. Outside, the stars emerged one by one, indifferent and eternal. Inside, a widow and her children slept in warmth and safety, held by walls that had remembered love and were learning it again. And somewhere in the master bedroom on the 3rd floor, Harrison Cole stood at his own window, looking out at the same stars, wondering if Catherine would approve of what he'd done, hoping that somewhere in the vast mystery of whatever came after, she knew he was trying to honor her, trying to fill the emptiness, trying to turn grief into something that might, someday, resemble grace. The house creaked and settled around them all, old timbers adjusting to new weight, preparing for the story that was just beginning to unfold within its walls. A story of loss transformed, of desperation met with unexpected mercy, of a rancher, a widow, and 2 children who would discover that sometimes family isn't about blood, it's about choosing, again and again, to build something beautiful from the wreckage of what was lost. But that story was for tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after. Tonight, there was only warmth and food and rest and the gentle sound of breathing in rooms that had been empty too long. Tonight, for the first time in longer than anyone could remember, the Cole Ranch felt like home. Morning arrived with the softness Margaret had forgotten existed. Not the harsh jolt of cold air through broken window panes. Not the gnawing urgency of hunger, but gentle. Sunlight filtering through clean curtains. The distant sound of roosters crowing. The smell of coffee drifting up from somewhere below. She lay still for a long moment, eyes closed, afraid that opening them would shatter the dream. But when she finally looked, the blue room remained solid around her. Real wood, real walls, real warmth from embers still glowing in the fireplace. She had slept through the entire night, No waking every hour to check on shivering children. No lying awake calculating how to stretch nothing into something. Just sleep, deep and dreamless, the kind her body had been craving for months. A soft knock preceded Rosa's entry. The housekeeper carried a tray laden with breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, bacon, fresh coffee, and her weathered face showed approval at finding Margaret awake. "Buenos dias, señora. I thought you might prefer eating here this morning. Give yourself time to adjust." Rosa set the tray on the writing desk. "The children are already up. Luke found the kitchen 20 minutes ago asking about those kittens, and Anna was right behind him wanting to know if the books in the nursery were really for reading or just for show." Margaret sat up, suddenly anxious. "I'm sorry, I should have been up sooner. You should have rested, which you did." Rosa's tone brooked no argument. "The children are fine. I gave them breakfast, showed them where the barn is. Harrison's with them now, introducing them to the kittens and the horses. Eat while it's hot." The food was as real as everything else. Margaret ate slowly, savoring each bite, still half afraid it would vanish. Through the window, she could see the barn, could make out small figures moving near its entrance. Luke's laugh carried across the distance, bright and pure. When had she last heard him laugh like that? "There are clothes in the wardrobe," Rosa said, moving to stoke the fire. "They belonged to Harrison's wife, Catherine. He asked me to keep them, said he couldn't bear to give them away. But he told me this morning you should have them. Said Catherine would want them used, not hidden." Margaret's throat tightened. "I can't take a dead woman's clothes." "You can and you will. Catherine was taller than you, but not by much. I can alter what needs altering." Rosa straightened from the fireplace, dusting her hands on her apron. "She would have liked you, I think. Catherine believed empty hands were a sin when there was work to be done and empty bellies to fill. She would have brought you here herself if she'd lived." "What was she like?" Rosa's expression softened with memory. "Kind, smart, smarter than most men wanted to admit. She ran this ranch alongside Harrison, knew every cow, every acre, every hand by name. When she walked into town, she didn't see rich or poor, just people. Made her unpopular with certain folks who thought their money made them better." A sad smile crossed her face. "She died loving Harrison and that boy with everything she had. Some people think that's tragedy. I think it's blessing, to love that much, even if it's brief." Margaret finished her coffee, the warmth spreading through her chest. "How long have you worked here?" 20 years. I came when Harrison and Catherine were newlyweds, this house barely finished, the ranch half what it is now. I've watched it grow, watched it fill with life, watched it—" She paused, pain flickering across her features. "Watched it empty again. These last 5 years, I've kept everything perfect, everything ready, waiting for the day Harrison would let people in again. Yesterday, when he came to the kitchen and said you were staying, I thanked God. This house needs voices, needs life, needs what you and those children bring just by being here." The weight of that responsibility settled on Margaret's shoulders. They weren't just accepting charity, they were filling a void, healing a wound they hadn't caused but could perhaps help mend. "Rosa, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be anything except what I was, a poor widow trying to survive. I don't know how to live in a house like this, how to act around a man like Harrison Cole." "Then don't act." Rosa moved toward the door. "Just be. Be grateful. Be honest. Be yourself. That's all anyone can ask. Now get dressed. Harrison wants to show you the office, explain the bookkeeping. The accounts are a disaster. His last bookkeeper couldn't add 2 and 2 without getting 5. After Rosa left, Margaret approached the wardrobe with trembling hands. Inside hung dresses in various fabrics, wool for winter, cotton for summer, silk for occasions that seemed impossible in her current life. She chose the simplest, a dark blue wool day dress with modest trim. It was 2 long by 3 inches and slightly loose in the shoulders, but it was clean and whole and finer than anything she'd owned even before Thomas died. She dressed slowly, her fingers remembering the feel of quality fabric, the weight of clothing that wasn't threadbare. There was a mirror above the washstand. She forced herself to look. The woman staring back was still gaunt, still marked by months of hardship. But something in her eyes had changed overnight. The desperate hollowness had been replaced by something fragile but present, hope, perhaps, or simply the relief of not being afraid for one morning. She found her way downstairs following the sound of voices. The office was on the main floor, accessed through a door off the main hallway. Harrison sat at a massive oak desk buried under ledgers, receipts, and papers that seemed to have no organizational system whatsoever. He looked up when she entered, and something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "That was Catherine's favorite dress," he said quietly. "The color matches your eyes." Margaret felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Rosa said I should use them. If it's too painful, I can—" "It's not painful." He stood, gestured to a chair beside the desk. "It's good. They should be worn, not locked away gathering dust. Please sit." She sat. The chair was comfortable, the leather worn smooth by years of use. Harrison returned to his own seat and pushed a ledger toward her. "This is my shame," he said with a wry smile. "Numbers and I have never been friends. My last bookkeeper, Ernest, quit because I apparently drove him to distraction with my complete disregard for proper accounting practices. See if you can make sense of it." Margaret opened the ledger and immediately understood Ernest's distraction. Income and expenses were recorded randomly, sometimes by date, sometimes by amount, occasionally not at all. Arithmetic errors appeared every few pages. Cross-references led nowhere. "This is—" She searched for diplomatic words. "A disaster. You can say it." "Challenging." She ran her finger down a column of numbers. "But fixable. It'll take time, but I can reorganize this, create a proper system, reconcile everything against bank statements." "How long?" She considered, mentally calculating the work involved. 2 weeks for the basics, maybe a month to have everything truly in order." Harrison leaned back in his chair, relief visible in his posture. "Ernest said it would take 3 months and cost me $200. Ernest was either incompetent or taking advantage. Margaret's voice held an edge. Numbers didn't lie, and she'd always had a gift for seeing their patterns. "This is straightforward work, just tedious." "Then the job's yours. $15 a week plus room and board." "Too little?" "Too much." The amount staggered her. She'd been making $3 a week taking in washing, and that had dried up. "That's generous to the point of charity." "It's what I paid Ernest, and you're clearly better qualified." "Not charity, value." His gray eyes held hers. "Mrs. Lane, I need you to understand something. I'm not a charitable man. I'm a businessman. I don't make decisions based on sentiment. I'm offering you this position because you can do the work and do it well. The fact that you need the position is secondary. Can you accept that?" Could she? Margaret examined her pride, that stubborn thing that had nearly killed her and her children rather than let her beg. It was still there, still sensitive, but tempered now by pragmatism. "Yes," she said, "I can accept that." "Good." He pulled out another ledger. "Now, let me show you what needs doing, and you can tell me how I've been managing this ranch wrong for 5 years. They worked through the morning, Harrison explaining his system, or lack thereof, while Margaret took notes and began mentally reorganizing everything into coherent structure. He was right that he wasn't good with numbers, but he knew his ranch intimately. He could tell her exactly how many head of cattle grazed in each pasture, which hands were most reliable, what supplies needed ordering and when. The information was all there in his head. It just needed proper recording. Noon arrived with Rosa's call to lunch. They found Anna and Luke in the kitchen, faces flushed from morning adventures, talking over each other in their excitement. "Mama, the kittens are so small. Mr. Cole let me hold one and it fell asleep in my hands." Luke's eyes shone with wonder. "And there's a horse named Daisy who's going to have a baby. And Mr. Cole said maybe we could help name it when it comes." Anna's excitement matched her brother's. Margaret felt her throat tighten watching them. Children again. Not small, silent sufferers, but actual children, excited and chattering and alive. Lunch was soup and sandwiches, simple but abundant. They ate at the kitchen table, Harrison, Rosa, Margaret, and the children, and the conversation flowed easily. Harrison asked Anna about the books in the nursery, listened seriously as she described her favorite. He asked Luke about the kittens, helped the boy remember each one's coloring to distinguish them. He was good with children. The realization struck Margaret with unexpected force, not awkward, not distant, but genuinely engaged, genuinely interested. Whatever grief he carried for his lost son, he didn't let it make him cruel to other children. After lunch, Rosa conscripted the children to help her in the garden, checking what had survived the winter, planning spring planting. Margaret returned to the office, and Harrison showed her where supplies were kept: fresh ledgers, pens, ink, all the tools she'd need. "I should warn you," he said, as she began sorting papers into preliminary piles. "Tomorrow is Sunday. We attend services in town." Margaret's hand stilled. "All of us?" "All of us." His tone was firm. "You're part of this household now. That means you come to church with us. People will talk." She didn't look at him, focused on a receipt for feed grain. "A widow and her children moving into a widower's house? They'll say terrible things. Let them." Now she did look up. Harrison stood by the window, backlit by afternoon sun, his expression set. People talked when Catherine insisted on riding fence lines with the men, said it wasn't proper. She ignored them. People talked when she invited the immigrant families to Christmas dinner, said she was lowering herself. She ignored them too. He turned from the window. "People will always talk, Mrs. Lane. The question is whether you let their talk determine your actions. Easy to say when you have money and position. No easier than when you have nothing." His voice gentled. "I know what people will say, probably already are saying, but you and your children need a place to live, and I have space to offer. We can let gossip drive us to dishonest hiding, or we can live openly and let our actions speak truth. Your choice." It wasn't really a choice. Margaret knew that. Hide in the gossip would fester, grow uglier in shadows. Live openly, and at least there was a chance people would see the reality. Honest work, honest arrangement, nothing shameful. "We'll come to church," she said quietly. "Good." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Mrs. Lane, thank you." "For what?" "For not letting pride make you refuse help you needed. Catherine always said pride was just fear wearing a fancy coat. Took me years to understand what she meant. You understood it yesterday." He left her alone with the ledgers and her thoughts. Margaret worked through the afternoon, losing herself in numbers that, unlike people, behaved predictably. Columns balanced, or they didn't. Errors could be found and corrected. There was comfort in that certainty. Evening came with its rituals. Rosa prepared dinner: roast chicken, potatoes, green beans from the cellar stores, and they gathered again in the kitchen. Luke told elaborate stories about the kitten's adventures. Anna had found a book about horses and peppered Harrison with questions about breeds and training. After dinner, Harrison surprised them all by producing a chess set. "Your mother mentioned you're good with numbers, Anna. Chess is all about seeing patterns, planning ahead. Want to learn?" Anna's face lit up. "Yes, please." They set up the board on the parlor table, and Margaret watched her daughter lean forward eagerly as Harrison explained how each piece moved. Luke tried to follow along, but quickly grew bored, wandering instead to the window to watch the sunset paint the snow gold and pink. Margaret picked up needlework Rosa had provided, Catherine's embroidery basket, another gift from the dead to the living, and tried to focus on making even stitches. But her attention kept drifting to the chess lesson, to Harrison's patient explanations, to Anna's quick understanding and quicker questions. This was domestic peace, the kind she'd had with Thomas before illness stole him, the kind she'd thought she'd never have again. "You're thinking too hard about where you want to go," Harrison was saying. "Think about where I might go instead. Anticipate. Defense is as important as offense." Anna studied the board, her small face serious. Then she moved a piece with decisive confidence. "There." Harrison's eyebrows rose. "Well done. You saw the trap. You left your knight exposed. If I'd moved where I wanted, you'd have taken my queen." "Exactly." He made his own move. "Your father taught you to think ahead?" Anna's face fell slightly. "Papa taught me arithmetic. He said girls should know numbers so men couldn't cheat them, but he died before teaching me much else." The room went quiet except for the fire's crackle. Harrison looked at Anna for a long moment, something working behind his eyes. "Then I'll teach you the much else," he said quietly. "Chess, numbers, anything you want to learn. Your father was right that girls should know things. My Catherine could calculate profit margins faster than any man I knew. Knowledge is power, Anna. Don't let anyone tell you different." "My papa said that too." Anna's voice was small. He said I was smart enough to do anything. He was right. Margaret had to look away, blinking against tears. Thomas would have liked Harrison Cole, would have trusted him with their children, would have been grateful his family had found safety here. Luke climbed into Margaret's lap, tired from the day's adventures, and she held him while his breathing gradually slowed into sleep. Rosa appeared from the kitchen, took in the scene. Anna and Harrison bent over the chessboard, Luke sleeping against his mother, and smiled. "This house sounds right again," the housekeeper murmured, passing through. "Como debe ser," as it should be. The evening wound down gradually. Anna eventually lost her chess match, but begged for another game tomorrow. Harrison agreed readily. Margaret carried Luke upstairs while he mumbled sleepily about kittens. Anna followed, clutching her horse book. In the nursery, Margaret helped them into nightclothes, also from the wardrobe, also Catherine's, clothing her son Benjamin would have grown into if he'd lived. The thought should have been morbid, but instead felt like benediction. These clothes, this room, this house, all waiting for children to give them purpose again. "Mama," Anna whispered after Margaret had tucked her in. "Is this real? Will we really stay here?" "I think so, baby." "What if Mr. Cole changes his mind?" Margaret smoothed her daughter's hair. "Then we'll face that when it comes. But I don't think he will. I think he's a man who keeps his word." "I like him." Anna's eyes were already drooping. "He talks to me like I'm smart." "That's because you are smart. Papa used to say that." Papa was right. Anna was asleep before Margaret finished the sentence. In the other bed, Luke was already deep in dreams, probably about kittens. Margaret stood between them for a long moment, watching them breathe, watching color in their cheeks that had been absent for months. She left the door cracked, so she'd hear if they woke, and returned to her own room. The blue room with its comfortable bed and glowing fireplace. She should sleep. Tomorrow was Sunday, and apparently they'd be attending church, facing the town, facing whatever gossip was already spreading. But she felt restless, uncertain. She pulled Catherine's shawl from the wardrobe, blue wool, soft as clouds, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then she descended the stairs quietly, intending just to walk a bit, settle her thoughts. She found Harrison on the front porch, leaning against the railing, looking out at the moonlit ranch. He turned at the sound of the door. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too much sleep last night, maybe. Or too much thinking." She moved to stand beside him, maintaining careful distance. "I wanted to thank you. For Anna. For the chess. For telling her she's smart. For being patient with her questions. She is smart. No patience required for truth." He shifted slightly. "My Ben would have been 8 now. I wonder sometimes what he'd be interested in, what he'd be good at, whether he'd have liked chess or preferred something else entirely." "You'd have been a good father to him." "I'll never know." The words were matter of fact, but pain underlay them. That's the hardest part. Not just that they're gone, but that I'll never know what could have been. Who he would have become. What Catherine would have done with all those years she should have had. Margaret pulled the shawl tighter. Thomas used to say that the worst thief was the one who stole futures. Not what was, but what should have been. Your husband was a wise man. He was a good man. Not perfect. He had a temper sometimes, and he'd forget to come home when he was working on a project that interested him. But he loved us fiercely, and when the fever took him, he fought so hard to stay. The doctor said he'd never seen anyone fight like that, but fighting wasn't enough. They stood in silence, two people who'd lost everything, who'd had their futures stolen, now standing on a porch trying to figure out what came next. "Tomorrow will be difficult," Harrison said finally. "The town will have heard by now that you're here. People will stare. Some will be cruel. If you'd rather stay home, I'll understand." "No." Margaret surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. "You said we should live openly, let our actions speak truth. You're right. I won't hide. Won't let my children think there's shame in accepting help when we needed it. There will be shame thrown at you anyway. Let them throw it. I'm tougher than I look." He glanced at her, and something like respect showed in his expression. "Yes, I'm beginning to see that." A horse whinnied in the distance. An owl hooted from the barn. The night was cold but clear, stars scattered across the sky like seeds cast by a generous hand. "Mrs. Lane." "Margaret." The correction came automatically. If we're living in the same house, if I'm working for you, we should probably use first names. Seems ridiculous to be formal. Margaret, then. He tested the name, nodded. And you should call me Harrison. Mr. Cole makes me sound like my father, and we didn't get along. Why not? He thought running a ranch meant sitting in an office while other men did the work. I disagreed. We fought about it until the day he died. Harrison's mouth quirked. Catherine said I was stubborn. I said I was right. She said those weren't mutually exclusive. Margaret found herself smiling. I would have liked her. She would have liked you too. Would have brought you here herself months ago if she'd known you needed help. Catherine collected people. Anyone struggling, anyone in need. She'd bring them here, find them work, give them a chance. Drove the town ladies crazy. They thought she was naive, taken advantage of. She didn't care. But you stopped after she died. Stopped bringing people here. I couldn't. His voice dropped. Everything reminded me of her. Every person I helped was someone she wasn't here to help. Every kindness I showed felt like betrayal because she wasn't beside me showing it too. So I stopped. Closed the doors, kept everyone out except Rosa. He looked at her directly. Until yesterday. Until I saw you at that gate and heard Catherine's voice in my head saying, "Don't you dare turn them away." I'm glad you listened to her. So am I. The moment stretched between them, neither quite comfortable nor uncomfortable, just present. Real. Two damaged people standing on a porch trying to figure out how to move forward. I should sleep, Margaret said finally. Tomorrow comes early. It does. Harrison straightened from the railing. Margaret? Thank you. For what? For being brave enough to ask for help. For trusting me with your children. For giving this house a reason to be more than a monument to grief. She didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and went inside. Upstairs, she checked on the children, both sleeping peacefully, then returned to the blue room. She removed Catherine's dress carefully, hung it in the wardrobe, and slipped into the nightgown Rosa had provided. The bed welcomed her like an old friend. She sank into its comfort and stared at the ceiling, thinking about tomorrow, about church, about facing people's judgments. But more than that, thinking about Harrison's words, giving this house a reason to be more than a monument to grief. Was that what they were doing? She'd thought they were simply surviving, accepting charity dressed up as employment. But maybe it was more complicated. Maybe they were all healing each other, filling each other's empty spaces without quite realizing it. The thought should have frightened her. She'd only been here one day, after all, barely knew Harrison Cole beyond his reputation and his unexpected kindness. But instead, she felt something like peace, or at least the possibility of peace, which was more than she'd had in months. Tomorrow they'd face the town, face judgment, gossip, cruelty disguised as concern. But tonight, they had warmth and food and safety. Tonight, her children slept without hunger. Tonight, she could rest without fear. Tomorrow would come regardless. Tonight was enough. Margaret closed her eyes and let sleep take her, held safe by walls that remembered love and were slowly, carefully, learning to hold it again. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made everything feel exposed. Margaret woke early, her stomach already tight with anticipation of what the day would bring. Rosa had laid out Catherine's Sunday dress the night before, a deep green wool with black trim, modest but elegant, the kind of dress that announced respectability without arrogance. Margaret dressed with trembling fingers, aware that every choice mattered today. Hairpin severely back, no adornment except her thin wedding band. She wanted to look proper, employed, nothing that could be twisted into impropriety by malicious tongues. The children were already awake when she checked on them, sitting on Anna's bed, whispering to each other with the nervous energy of those about to face judgment they didn't fully understand. "Mama, what if people are mean?" Luke asked, his small face anxious. Margaret knelt before them, taking a hand from each. "Some people will be mean. Some people always are when they see something they don't understand. But you remember who you are. Lane children, smart and strong and good. You have nothing to be ashamed of." "Are we ashamed of living here?" Anna's question was too perceptive for 7. "No, baby. We're grateful. There's a difference, and anyone who can't see that isn't worth worrying about." But Margaret worried anyway as they descended to breakfast. Harrison was already in the kitchen, dressed in a black suit that made him look even more imposing, his silver-streaked hair combed back neatly. He looked every inch the wealthy rancher, the kind of man people respected and feared in equal measure. Rosa had prepared a feast: eggs, bacon, biscuits, gravy, but Margaret could barely eat. Her stomach churned with scenarios, each worse than the last. What would people say? What would they think? Would Harrison come to regret this decision when his reputation suffered? "You're worrying too much." Harrison's voice broke through her spiral. He sat across from her, his gray eyes steady. "I can see it in your face. Stop." "Easy for you to say. You have position, money, respect. I have nothing but the charity you've shown, and people will see a widow I've employed working honestly for honest wages. That's all they need to see." He buttered a biscuit with deliberate calm. "Margaret, I've lived in this town 42 years. I know every family, every secret, every skeleton in every closet. If anyone dares suggest impropriety, I have ammunition enough to make them regret it. You're under my protection now. That means something. It means people will think I seduced you for your money. Let them think it." He took a bite of biscuit, chewed, swallowed. "I know the truth, you know the truth. That's sufficient." Rosa snorted from the stove. "Harrison, you are sometimes naive for a man who runs a ranch. Senora Lane is right to worry. Women will be cruel because they are jealous. Men will be cruel because they see weakness to exploit. It is the way of the world." "Then the world needs changing." Harrison's tone hardened. "I'm tired of living by rules made by small-minded people who measure worth in gossip and judgment. Catherine fought against it her whole life, and I dishonored her memory by retreating when she died. No more." The words hung in the air, a declaration that felt larger than just this morning, this church service. Margaret looked at him and saw something she recognized: exhaustion with pretense, with living small to avoid notice. She'd felt it herself these past months, making herself invisible, trying not to exist too loudly, lest someone notice how desperately poor they were. "All right," she said quietly. "We go to church, we hold our heads up, we let our truth speak for itself." Harrison's expression softened. "That's all I ask." The wagon ride into town took 30 minutes. Harrison drove while Rosa sat beside him, Margaret and the children in the back. The morning was cold but beautiful, sunlight glittering off snow, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. Under other circumstances, Margaret might have enjoyed the ride. Today, each mile closer to town felt like approaching a battlefield. Timber Creek's church stood at the center of town, a white clapboard building with a steeple that pointed accusingly at heaven. Wagons and horses filled the yard, families gathering in clusters before the service. Conversation hummed like bees, until Harrison's wagon appeared. Then silence fell like a curtain dropping. Margaret felt every eye turn toward them, saw mouths stop mid-word, saw heads lean together as whispers erupted. She forced herself to sit straight, to meet those stares with her chin up, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Harrison stopped the wagon and climbed down with unhurried grace. He helped Rosa down, then turned to Margaret and offered his hand. She took it, acutely aware of the propriety in the gesture, the careful respectability of it. He lifted Luke down next, then Anna, treating them with the same courtesy he'd shown the adults. "Stay close," he murmured. "Let me handle this." They walked toward the church as a unit. Harrison in front, Rosa beside him, Margaret behind with a child holding each hand. The crowd parted like water, and in that parting, Margaret read everything: shock, curiosity, disapproval, speculation. Some faces showed sympathy, but most showed judgment already rendered without trial. A woman in an elaborate hat stepped forward, blocking their path. She was perhaps 50, dressed in silk that cost more than Margaret had earned in a year, and her smile was razor-sharp. "Harrison Cole, what an unexpected pleasure to see you with guests," her voice carried, ensuring everyone heard. "And who might these charming people be?" "Mrs. Bancroft." Harrison's tone was polite but cold. "This is Mrs. Margaret Lane and her children, Anna and Luke. Mrs. Lane is my new bookkeeper. They're residing at the ranch." "Residing?" Mrs. Bancroft let the word hang. "How Progressive of you. And so soon after meeting them, I assume? Unless you've been keeping secrets, Harrison. I hired an employee who needed housing. Hardly scandalous, Evelyn. You employ a live-in cook yourself. My cook is 60 years old and resembles a bulldog. Mrs. Bancroft's eyes raked over Margaret, assessing, dismissing. Mrs. Lane appears considerably younger and considerably more presentable. The insult was wrapped in compliment's clothing, but everyone heard the blade beneath. Margaret felt Anna's hand tighten in hers, felt her daughter's tension. Mrs. Lane is a widow raising 2 children alone, Harrison said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. She needed work. I needed a bookkeeper. The arrangement benefits us both. If you're implying something inappropriate, Evelyn, say it plainly so I can address it directly. The threat in his words was unmistakable. Mrs. Bancroft's smile faltered. I'm implying nothing, Harrison. Merely expressing surprise at your sudden philanthropy. You've been quite the hermit these 5 years. Forgive us for being startled by your emergence. Forgiven. Harrison moved forward, forcing Mrs. Bancroft to step aside or be walked through. Now, if you'll excuse us, the service is about to start. They entered the church, and Margaret felt the weight of 100 stairs following them. Harrison led them to his usual pew, third from the front, right side, and they filed in. Margaret found herself between Harrison and Rosa, the children beyond Rosa, and she was grateful for the buffer, for not being entirely exposed. Reverend Matthews emerged from the vestry, a thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed spectacles, and the bearing of someone who believed his moral authority superseded all others. His eyes found them immediately, and Margaret saw his lips thin with disapproval. The service began with hymns Margaret knew by heart, though her voice came out thin and uncertain. Around them, other voices rose strong and confident, proclaiming faith and righteousness. Margaret wondered how many of those righteous voices would tear her apart the moment they left this building. Reverend Matthews' sermon was pointed enough to draw blood. He spoke of temptation, of the dangers of situations that appeared innocent but harbored sin. He quoted scripture about avoiding the appearance of evil, about the importance of propriety, about how the righteous must guard against scandal. He never said Harrison's name, never looked directly at their pew, but everyone knew who he meant. Margaret felt shame burn through her, hot and toxic. Beside her, Harrison sat stone-faced, his jaw tight. On her other side, Rosa's fingers drummed against the pew with barely suppressed anger. The sermon seemed endless. When it finally concluded, when they stood for the final hymn, Margaret wanted nothing more than to flee. But Harrison's hand touched her elbow, steadying, and she remained upright. Outside, the attack came swiftly. Harrison, might I have a word? Silas Murdoch, the banker, approached with false friendliness. He was a portly man who wore his wealth like armor, gold watch chain glinting across his vest. In private? Anything you need to say can be said here. Harrison didn't move from Margaret's side. Murdoch's expression hardened. Very well, I've been reviewing your accounts, Harrison. That loan you took out 3 years ago to expand the southern pastures, it's coming due in 6 months. I'm aware. I'll pay it in full as agreed. Given your recent expenditures, I wanted to ensure you'll have the funds available. Murdoch's gaze slid to Margaret, unmistakable in its implication. Supporting additional household members can strain even substantial resources. My finances are sound, Silas, and Mrs. Lane earns her keep. She's not a charity case. Of course. Of course. Murdoch's smile was oily. Still, the bank must protect its interests. I may need to call in that loan early, just to be prudent. The threat was naked now. Harrison's protection came with a price, and Murdoch intended to collect it. You'd be breaking our contract. Harrison's voice went dangerous. I'd be exercising a clause that allows early collection if the borrower's circumstances change significantly. Taking in a widow and children qualifies as a significant change. You absolute... Rosa started forward, but Harrison caught her arm. Do what you must, Silas. I'll have your money ready if you insist on calling it in. Harrison's smile was all teeth. But you might want to consider whether making an enemy of the Cole Ranch is wise. I know which ranchers bank with you, which ones are struggling, which ones might be looking for excuses to move their business elsewhere. You call in my loan, I'll make sure every cattleman within 100 miles knows you can't be trusted to honor your agreements. Murdoch's face mottled red. Are you threatening me? I'm stating facts. You want to play hardball over my hiring decisions? I'll play back. Your choice. They stared at each other, two men measuring wills. Finally, Murdoch stepped back. The loan stands as agreed. For now. He turned on his heel and stalked away. Margaret released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Around them, people who'd been watching tried to pretend they hadn't been listening, but she saw the calculation in their eyes, the wheels turning as they decided which side to align with. Mrs. Cole's charity cases are causing problems already. A woman's voice carried from a nearby cluster, meant to be overheard. She's been gone 5 years, and he's already replacing her with the first desperate widow who shows up. Margaret flinched. Harrison turned toward the voice, his expression thunderous. But Margaret caught his arm. Don't, she whispered. It'll only make things worse. It can't get much worse. It can always get worse. She'd learned that lesson thoroughly these past months. Please, let's just go home. Home. The word slipped out unbidden, but she didn't take it back. The ranch felt more like home after 2 days than her drafty room in town ever had. Harrison's jaw worked, but he nodded. To the wagon. They walked through the gauntlet of stares and whispers, heads high despite the venom in the air. Rosa muttered prayers in Spanish, curses probably, her face dark with anger. The children stayed silent, pressed close to Margaret, absorbing the hostility they couldn't fully understand. At the wagon, Harrison was helping Rosa up when a voice called out, "Cole, wait!" A young man approached, perhaps 25, with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands that marked him as a working man. He pulled his hat off respectfully. "Mr. Cole, I'm Jack Morrison. I worked for you 3 summers ago, helped with the cattle drive?" Harrison's expression cleared slightly. "I remember. You were good with the horses. What can I do for you, Jack?" "Actually, sir, I was hoping to do something for you." Jack's gaze flicked to Margaret, then back to Harrison. "I heard what Reverend Matthews said in there, what Mrs. Bancroft and Mr. Murdoch said outside. It's not right them treating you like this for helping folks who need it. My wife Sarah and I, we remember how Mrs. Cole used to help people. We think you're honoring her memory, not disgracing it." Harrison blinked, clearly not expecting support. Thank you, Jack." "There's more of us who feel the same way, sir. The working folks, the ones who remember how Mrs. Cole was. We wanted you to know you've got friends, even if the rich folks are being ugly about it." Jack nodded to Margaret. "Ma'am, welcome to Timber Creek. Hope it treats you better than it did this morning." He put his hat back on and walked away, leaving Harrison staring after him with something like amazement on his face. "See?" Rosa said quietly. "Not everyone is terrible, just the ones with money and small hearts." They rode home in silence, each processing the morning's battles. Margaret felt exhausted, wrung out, and they'd only survived the first public appearance. How many more Sundays would they have to endure this? How long before Harrison decided she and her children weren't worth the trouble? Back at the ranch, Harrison helped them down from the wagon and then stood there, seeming uncertain for the first time since Margaret had met him. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I knew it would be difficult, but I didn't expect them to be quite that vicious. You warned me." Margaret tried for a smile and almost managed it. "I chose to go anyway." "If you want to stay home next Sunday, I'll understand." "No." The word came out harder than intended. "No. If I hide, they win. They get to control my life through fear and shame. I won't give them that power." Harrison studied her for a long moment, something like respect growing in his expression. "You're tougher than you look." "I've had to be." Rosa herded the children inside, promising cookies and milk, leaving Margaret and Harrison alone in the yard. The afternoon sun was warm despite the season, melting the snow on the barn roof, creating a rhythm of drips that counted seconds. "They'll keep coming after us," Margaret said. "Murdoch, the Reverend, people like Mrs. Bancroft. They'll look for any excuse to say our arrangement is improper. Let them look. They won't find anything because there's nothing to find. That won't matter to them. They've already decided we're guilty." Margaret wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the sun. Harrison, maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I should take the children and find somewhere else. Don't. He caught her arm, then released it quickly, aware of propriety even here. Don't let them drive you away. That's exactly what they want. To punish me for defying their expectations. To punish you for daring to need help. If you leave, they win. But your reputation? My reputation survived burying my wife and son. It'll survive employing a widow and her children. His voice gentled. Margaret, I meant what I said yesterday. This house needs you, needs life, needs voices, needs purpose beyond being a monument to grief. Don't take that away because people are cruel. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think they could weather this storm, that eventually people would accept their arrangement for what it was. But she'd seen the looks, heard the words, felt the judgment like physical blows. I don't want to ruin you, she whispered. You won't. But even if you could, even if every person in that town turned against me, it would be worth it. He looked toward the house where her children's laughter suddenly rang out. That sound, children laughing in this house, is worth any price they want to charge. Margaret followed his gaze. Through the kitchen window, she could see Luke showing Rosa something, his face animated with excitement. Anna sat at the table, already absorbed in a book. Normal, happy, safe. All right, she said. We stay. But Harrison, if this gets worse, if they threaten your business or try to take the ranch, then I'll deal with it. That's my problem, not yours. Your only job is to balance my disastrous books and keep those children happy. Can you do that? Yes? Then we're settled. He started toward the barn, then paused. Margaret, thank you for not running. Took courage to stand there and take what they threw at you. I've had practice being judged. Being poor is excellent preparation for being scorned. You're not poor anymore. You're employed, housed, fed. No one in that town can say you're charity. You're working for every bit of what you get. After he left, Margaret stood alone in the yard, letting his words settle into her bones. Employed, housed, fed. 3 things she hadn't been a week ago. 3 things worth fighting for. She went inside and found the children with Rosa in the kitchen, decorating cookies Rosa had made. Stars and hearts and circles, covered in sugar and cinnamon. Mama, look! Luke held up a star cookie with uneven coating. I made this one myself. It's beautiful, baby. She kissed the top of his head, breathing in the scent of little boy and sugar. Mrs. Rosa said we can take cookies to the barn cats tomorrow, Anna reported, and maybe the horses too if Mr. Cole says it's all right. I'm sure he will. Margaret accepted a cookie from Rosa, warm, sweet, perfect, and let the moment wrap around her. This was why she'd swallowed her pride, why she'd begged at that gate, why she'd endure 1,000 cruel church services. For this, her children safe, fed, happy. For this, a chance at a future instead of a slow death by starvation and cold. That evening, after dinner, after the children had been tucked into bed with full bellies and warm quilts, Margaret returned to the office. The ledgers waited, their chaos a puzzle she was eager to solve. She lit the lamps and settled at the desk, losing herself in numbers that behaved predictably. She'd been working perhaps an hour when Harrison appeared in the doorway. You don't have to work tonight. It's Sunday. I want to. She didn't look up from the column she was tallying. It helps me think. Numbers make sense when nothing else does. He entered the room, moved to the window. I've been thinking about what happened today, about Murdoch's threat. He was trying to control you through money. It's what powerful men do. Margaret finished her addition, made a note in the margin. My father used to say that debt was just slavery with better paperwork. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was a bitter man who drank too much and died owing more than he owned, but occasionally between the bottle and the bitterness, he'd say something worth remembering. She set down her pen, finally looking at him. Harrison, if Murdoch does call in that loan, I'll handle it. I have resources, assets I can liquidate if necessary. The ranch is sound. What if it's not enough? What if they all turn on you, the banker, the merchants, the other ranchers? What if they try to destroy you for helping us? He turned from the window, his gray eyes serious in the lamplight. Then they try, and I fight back. And maybe I win or maybe I lose, but at least I'll have fought for something worth fighting for instead of hiding in this house slowly dying of loneliness. He moved closer to the desk. Margaret, I was drowning before you came here. Drowning in grief and silence and this empty house that echoed with ghosts. You and your children threw me a rope by letting me help you. So don't think you're a burden. Your salvation, strange as that sounds. The words hung between them, too honest, too raw. Margaret didn't know how to respond. What to say to a man who'd just admitted his own desperate need while pretending to be strong. We'll save each other then, she said finally. You save us from starvation. We save you from loneliness. Fair trade. Fair trade, he agreed. He left her to her work, but his words stayed, circling her mind as she returned to the ledgers. Salvation. What a strange word for what was happening here. She'd thought she was accepting charity, taking advantage of a wealthy man's guilt-driven generosity. But maybe it was more complicated. Maybe they were all damaged people trying to piece together something new from the wreckage of what they'd lost. The week that followed established rhythms that began to feel like normalcy. Margaret worked in the office each morning, untangling Harrison's accounting disasters, creating systems that made sense. The chaos slowly transformed into order, expenses properly categorized, income accurately recorded, bank reconciliations that actually reconciled. Harrison spent his days managing the ranch but checked in regularly, asking questions about the accounts, learning the systems Margaret created. He was quick to understand once things were explained properly, and she realized his problems with bookkeeping stemmed not from inability, but from lack of structure. You think in patterns, not numbers, she told him Wednesday morning as they reviewed the month's expenditures. You need categories that match how you think about the ranch. Feed costs, labor costs, maintenance costs, everything divided by purpose, not by date. That makes sense. He studied the new ledger she'd created, organized exactly as she'd described. Ernest kept trying to force me to think chronologically, made my head hurt. Different minds work differently. A good system accommodates the user, not the other way around. The children thrived. Luke spent hours in the barn with the cats, the horses, any animal that would tolerate his enthusiastic attention. Anna divided her time between books and helping Margaret with the accounts, her quick mind grasping mathematical concepts with ease that suggested she'd inherited her father's gift for numbers. In the evenings, Harrison continued teaching Anna chess. The games grew more complex as she learned strategy, and Margaret would sit nearby with needlework, listening to their conversation about gambits and sacrifices and thinking 3 moves ahead. Life's like chess, Harrison told Anna Thursday night after she'd pulled off a particularly clever move. Not about being stronger or faster, but about being smarter, seeing what others miss, planning ahead. Papa used to say something similar, Anna replied, studying the board. He said poor people had to be smarter because they couldn't afford mistakes. Harrison was quiet for a moment. Your father was right, and you're smart, Anna. Don't ever let anyone tell you different because you're a girl or because you've been poor. Intelligence doesn't care about gender or bank accounts. Anna looked up at him with such trust, such hope, that Margaret had to turn away, blinking against tears. Her daughter had been so lost after Thomas died, so quiet and scared. To see her coming back to life, daring to hope again, was almost painful in its beauty. Friday brought new challenges. 2 ranch hands quit, announcing they wouldn't work for a man who kept inappropriate company. Harrison accepted their resignations without argument and hired replacements by afternoon. Young men who'd heard about the situation and wanted to work for someone who'd stand up to the town's judgment. Good riddance, Rosa declared, kneading bread dough with violent enthusiasm. Those 2 were lazy anyway, always complaining, never working hard. The new ones have fire in their eyes. They will do better. Saturday, Margaret ventured into town alone to buy fabric and thread. Rosa needed a new apron, and Margaret wanted to attempt altering some of Catherine's dresses to fit properly. She took the wagon, her heart hammering as she approached Timber Creek's main street. The general store fell silent when she entered. Mrs. Patterson behind the counter looked up, and her expression went carefully neutral. Mrs. Lane, what can I do for you? I need fabric for an apron. Cotton, something durable, and thread, needles if you have good ones. Mrs. Patterson moved to gather the items, and Margaret browsed, acutely aware of the other women in the store watching her. Their whispers were barely concealed, and fragments reached her ears. Shameless, living in sin. Poor Catherine must be rolling in her grave. Those children, exposed to such immorality. Margaret's hands trembled as she examined fabric, but she kept her head high, refused to scurry away like something shameful. This should do. Mrs. Patterson laid items on the counter. Her voice was cool but not cruel. That'll be $3.20. Margaret counted out the money carefully. Wages Harrison had paid her that morning, her first honest earnings in months. The bills felt substantial in her hands, proof that she was working, earning, not just accepting charity. As she gathered her purchases, a young woman approached, perhaps 20, with kind eyes and a worn but clean dress. Mrs. Lane, I'm Sarah Morrison, Jack's wife. He told me about meeting you Sunday. I remember. Thank you for your husband's kind words. He meant them. Sarah glanced around, lowering her voice. Most of us working folks, we think what Mr. Cole's doing is right and good. It's the rich ones with too much time and too little heart who are causing trouble. Don't let them drive you away. I won't. Margaret felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. Sarah, please. And if you ever need anything, someone to talk to, help with the children, anything, you come find me. We're at the little house past the mill, the one with blue shutters. It was a small thing, this offer of friendship, but it mattered more than Sarah could know. Margaret left the store with her purchases and a fragile thread of hope that perhaps not everyone in Timber Creek had turned against them. That evening, she worked on altering a gray wool dress while the children played a game Rosa had taught them, something involving buttons and a board drawn on paper. Harrison came in from his rounds, shrugged out of his coat, and settled in his chair with a newspaper. It felt domestic, comfortable, like they were a family instead of what they actually were, an employer, employee, and her children sharing space out of mutual convenience, except it didn't feel like convenience anymore. Mama, I'm tired, Luke announced, abandoning the game. Can we go to bed? Of course, baby. Margaret set aside her sewing. Anna, are you ready? Can I finish this chapter first? It's getting exciting. 10 more minutes, then up you go. Margaret shepherded Luke upstairs, helped him into his nightclothes, listened to his rambling account of the day's adventures with the barn cats. When she tucked him in, he looked up at her with eyes that were finally clear of fear and hunger. Mama, are we going to stay here forever? I don't know about forever, baby, but for now, yes. We're staying. Good. I like it here. Mr. Cole's nice, and Mrs. Rosa makes good cookies, and the kittens are growing so fast. I like it here, too. She kissed his forehead and returned downstairs for Anna, who grudgingly marked her place in the book and followed her mother up. After Anna was settled, Margaret returned to the parlor to find Harrison still reading his newspaper, the fire crackling softly. They settled? He asked without looking up. Out like candles. Margaret resumed her seat and picked up the dress. Luke asked if we're staying forever. What did you tell him? That we're staying for now. I didn't know what else to say. Harrison lowered the newspaper, his gray eyes serious. You can stay as long as you want. I thought that was understood. Nothing's certain in this world. I learned that when Thomas died. Fair enough. He folded the paper precisely, set it aside. But Margaret, for what it's worth, I hope you stay a long time. This house is better with you in it. The words should have been simple. Employer to employee, gratitude for services rendered. But something in how he said them, some quality in his voice, made them feel like more. Margaret focused on her sewing, pulling thread through fabric, not trusting herself to look at him. The accounts will be fully organized in another week. After that, it's just maintenance, daily entries, weekly reconciliations, not enough to justify full-time employment. Then we'll find other work. Rosa needs help with preserving when the garden comes in. The library needs cataloging. There's always something. He paused. Unless you want to leave? Feel obligated to go once the bookkeeping's done? No. The answer came quickly, honestly. No, if you'll have us, we'd like to stay. Then it's settled. but nothing felt settled. Everything felt precarious, balanced on the edge of something Margaret couldn't name. She finished the seam she was working on and bit off the thread, holding the dress up to examine her work. "That was Catherine's favorite dress for everyday wear," Harrison said quietly. "She wore it until it was threadbare, then wore it some more. Said comfortable trumped fashionable every time. She had good taste. The cut is simple but elegant. She'd be glad it's being used. She hated waste." He stood, stretched. "I should turn in. Early morning tomorrow. The cattle in the north pasture need checking." "Harrison?" She stopped him before he could leave. "Thank you. For everything. For the work, the home, the patience with my children. For not letting what people say change your mind about us being here." "No thanks necessary. You've earned everything you've gotten." He smiled, and it transformed his face from handsome to something warmer. "Sleep well, Margaret." After he left, Margaret sat alone with the dress in her lap and the fire slowly dying. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the black sky, indifferent witnesses to human struggles. Tomorrow was another Sunday, another church service, another gauntlet of judgment to run. But tonight, in this house that was slowly becoming home, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not just safety or relief, but the tentative, fragile possibility of joy. It wouldn't last. Nothing ever did. Life had taught her that lesson too thoroughly to forget. But for now, for this moment, she let herself feel it anyway. The possibility of joy, the beginning of healing, the slow, careful construction of something new from the ruins of what was lost. She finished her sewing and climbed the stairs to bed, passing the children's room where they slept peacefully, passing Harrison's closed door where lamplight showed beneath, and entering her own blue sanctuary where a fire had been laid and blankets turned down. Rosa's work, those small kindnesses that said, "You belong here." Margaret undressed and slipped between clean sheets, and for the second night in a row, she let herself hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope could hurt when it proved false. But hope was also the only thing that made survival worth the effort. So she hoped, there in the darkness, that maybe this strange arrangement could last, that maybe they could weather the town's judgment, that maybe, just maybe, broken people could build something whole together. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling around the eaves, but inside, the house held firm, sheltering all who dwelt within its walls. The second Sunday came too quickly. Margaret woke with that familiar knot in her stomach, the one that had become her constant companion before church services. But this time, something was different. She could hear voices downstairs, not just Harrison and Rosa, but others. Male voices, unfamiliar, mixed with the clink of coffee cups and the scrape of chairs. She dressed quickly and descended to find the kitchen full of ranch hands. 6 men stood around the table, hats in hands, looking uncomfortable but determined. Jack Morrison was among them, along with faces she'd seen working around the ranch all week. "Mrs. Lane." The oldest of them, a weathered man with gray streaking his dark beard, nodded respectfully. "I'm Tom Brennan, foreman here. We wanted to speak with you and Mr. Cole before church." Harrison stood by the stove, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Rosa was pouring coffee with more force than necessary, her mouth set in a grim line. "What's this about?" Margaret asked, though dread already told her the answer. "We heard talk in town yesterday," Tom said carefully. "Some of the merchants, they're planning something for today. Planning to make a scene at church, maybe try to get Reverend Matthews to publicly condemn the situation here." Margaret's hands went cold. "Condemn what situation? I'm employed here, that's all." "We know that, ma'am. Any fool with eyes can see you're working honest for honest wages. But there's folks who don't want to see it that way." Tom glanced at Harrison. "Boss, we thought you should know what you're walking into." "Who's behind it?" Harrison's voice was quiet, dangerous. "Banker Murdoch's stirring the pot pretty good. Mrs. Bancroft and her circle are fanning flames. Even some of the other ranchers are getting involved. Men who owe you no love because you've got better land, better cattle, better everything." Tom shifted his weight. "They're calling it a matter of morality, but it's really about bringing you down a peg. Always has been." Margaret felt the room tilt slightly. This wasn't just gossip anymore. It was organized opposition. They were coming after Harrison through her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "Then we don't go," she said suddenly. "The children and I stay home. Problem solved." That's not solving anything. Harrison's tone was firm. That's surrender. That's letting them dictate our lives through threats and intimidation. It's protecting you. If we're not there, they can't make a scene. If you're not there, they win. They'll say I was shamed into hiding you, that even I had to admit the impropriety. He pushed away from the stove. No. We go together, face whatever they've planned, and come out the other side. Mr. Cole, Jack Morrison spoke up, his young face earnest. We talked it over, all of us. We want to stand with you today. We'll sit in your pew, make it clear you've got support. Might make them think twice about causing trouble. Harrison looked at his men, really looked at them, and something shifted in his expression. You'd do that? Risk alienating the town on my account? Your account, sir? Tom Brennan's weathered face creased into what might have been a smile. This ain't about you. This is about doing what's right. Mrs. Cole, God rest her, she never let fear of gossip stop her from helping people. Reckon we owe her memory that much. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. These men, these working cowboys with calloused hands and sun-darkened faces, were willing to stand against the town's elite for the sake of principle. For her. For children, they barely knew. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say you'll let us help, Tom replied simply. Say you won't let the bastards, begging your pardon, ma'am, won't let them drive you away. Rosa set down the coffee pot with a definitive thunk. I am going too. Let them try to condemn me. I will give them an earful in 2 languages. Despite everything, Margaret almost smiled. All right, we go. We face them. Together. An hour later, they approached Timber Creek in a convoy of sorts. Harrison's wagon led, carrying Margaret, the children, and Rosa. Behind them came 2 more wagons carrying the ranch hands, all dressed in their Sunday best, which wasn't fancy, but it was clean and respectable. They looked like what they were, honest working men making a statement. The churchyard was already full when they arrived, and Margaret saw the moment people noticed their numbers, saw calculation replace smugness on certain faces, saw Mrs. Bancroft whisper urgently to Silas Murdoch, who scowled and shook his head. They'd expected Harrison to arrive alone, or with just Margaret and the children, easy targets, easily isolated. They hadn't expected an organized show of support. Stay close, Harrison murmured as he helped Margaret down. No matter what happens, stay close. The ranch hands formed a loose circle around them as they walked toward the church. Not threatening, not aggressive, just present, making it clear that any attack on Harrison Cole would have to go through them first. Reverend Matthews stood at the church door, his thin face pinched with disapproval. When he saw the group approaching, his expression darkened further. Mr. Cole, I'm afraid there's been a development. His voice carried across the churchyard, ensuring everyone heard. The elders and I have discussed your situation. We feel it would be best if Mrs. Lane and her children attended services elsewhere until proper arrangements can be made. The words hit like a slap. Margaret felt Anna's hand tighten in hers, felt Luke press against her leg. They were being barred from church, publicly, officially. What proper arrangements? Harrison's voice was deceptively calm. Mrs. Lane is a widow living under your roof without supervision or chaperone. The appearance is improper, scandalous even. We cannot condone such behavior by allowing her to worship here as if nothing were amiss. Rosa is my housekeeper and chaperone. Mrs. Lane has her own quarters in the East Wing. Nothing improper is occurring. So you claim? Reverend Matthews adjusted his spectacles. But appearances matter, Mr. Cole. We must consider the morals of our congregation, especially the young people who might take your behavior as permission for similar impropriety. What you're considering, Harrison said quietly, is punishing a widow and her children for the crime of being poor and accepting help. That's not morality, Reverend. That's cruelty dressed in religious clothing. A murmur ran through the crowd, some approving, some shocked at Harrison's directness. I will not be lectured on morality by a man who, Reverend Matthews began, but Tom Brennan interrupted. Reverend, begging your pardon, but you're being a hypocrite. The foreman's voice was rough but clear. Jesus spent his whole ministry helping the poor, the widowed, the orphaned. And here you are turning them away from God's house because rich folks think it looks bad. Pretty sure there's a Bible verse about that, something about camels and needles. Nervous laughter rippled through some of the crowd. Reverend Matthew's face flushed red. How dare you presume to tell me? I dare because someone needs to. Tom stepped forward, other ranch hands behind him. We work for Mr. Cole. We see what happens at that ranch. Mrs. Lane works harder than any bookkeeper he's ever had. Those children do chores, mind their manners, cause no trouble. There's nothing scandalous happening except in the minds of people who can't stand seeing someone get help without suffering for it. This is not a debate, Reverend Matthew's voice rose. The elders have decided. Mrs. Lane and her children are not welcome until... Then I'm not welcome either. Harrison's words cut through the chaos. If you bar them, you bar me. Simple as that. Silence fell like snow. Margaret stared at Harrison, unable to process what he'd just said. He was giving up his church, his place in the community, for them? Harrison, no, she whispered. You can't. I can and I am. He didn't look at her, kept his eyes locked on Reverend Matthews. You want to punish someone? Punish me. But you don't get to hurt a woman and children who've done nothing wrong except survive in a world that tried to kill them. You're making a mistake. Reverend Matthews' voice had gone cold. The church is the foundation of this community. Without it, I'll find God somewhere else. Pretty sure he's not limited to buildings run by men more concerned with appearances than with mercy. Harrison turned to the crowd. Anyone else who's tired of this kind of Christianity is welcome to worship at the Cole Ranch. Every Sunday, 10 o'clock. Rosa will make coffee. We'll read scripture, sing hymns, and actually try to live like Jesus taught instead of just talking about it. The challenge hung in the air. Margaret watched faces in the crowd, shock, calculation, approval, fear. Watched Silas Murdoch's expression twist with rage. Watched Mrs. Bancroft's mouth open and close like a fish, and watched Sarah Morrison step forward, her husband Jack beside her. We'll be there, Sarah said clearly. Count us in. Us too, called a woman Margaret didn't know, older, with work-worn hands and a kind face. And me, added a young man, barely 20, with the look of a farmer's son. One by one, people stepped forward, not many, maybe a dozen all told, but enough to make a statement, enough to show that Harrison Cole wasn't as isolated as his enemies hoped. Reverend Matthews saw his congregation fracturing before his eyes. You're all making a terrible mistake. The church will not forget this. Neither will we, Harrison replied. Come on, let's go home. They walked back to the wagons in a stunned silence. Margaret's mind reeled, trying to process what had just happened. Harrison had just publicly defied the church, split the congregation, declared war on the town's power structure, all for her and her children. The weight of that sacrifice pressed on her chest until she could barely breathe. At the ranch, the group gathered in the large parlor that hadn't been used in years. Harrison built up the fire while Rosa disappeared into the kitchen, returning with coffee and the cinnamon rolls she'd made that morning. The children sat with Sarah Morrison, who'd brought her own daughter, a girl about Anna's age. Margaret stood by the window watching people file in and felt Harrison's presence behind her before he spoke. You're angry, he said quietly. I'm terrified. She turned to face him. Harrison, do you understand what you've done? You've made permanent enemies of some of the most powerful people in this county. Murdoch will call in your loan. The merchants will refuse to sell to you. The other ranchers will band together against you at market. You've sacrificed everything for what's right. His gray eyes were steady. For people who needed defending. For the chance to honor Catherine's memory by actually living the values she taught instead of just mourning her. He glanced at the growing crowd in his parlor. I've been dead for 5 years, Margaret, going through motions, maintaining appearances, running this ranch like an automaton. Today, defending you and your children in front of that church, I felt alive for the first time since Catherine died. So no, I don't regret it. Not for a second. But your reputation, my reputation was built on Catherine's kindness and my own cowardice in abandoning it after she died. Maybe it's time to rebuild it on something more honest. He smiled slightly. Besides, You've met my reputation now, Silas Murdoch and Evelyn Bancroft, and that pompous reverend. You really think I'll miss their good opinion?" Despite everything, Margaret felt her lips twitch. "When you put it that way, exactly." He touched her elbow gently. "Come on, let's have our own church service. Can't be worse than what we just left." The impromptu service was unlike anything Margaret had experienced. Tom Brennan, surprisingly, had a beautiful singing voice and led them in hymns. Sarah Morrison read from the Bible, not stern warnings about propriety, but passages about mercy, kindness, welcoming strangers. Jack Morrison offered a prayer so simple and heartfelt it brought tears to Margaret's eyes. And Harrison spoke, not as a preacher, but as a man sharing his thoughts, about how easy it was to forget that faith without action meant nothing, that claiming to follow Jesus while turning away the hungry, the poor, the desperate was worse than hypocrisy. It was betrayal of everything he taught. Catherine used to say, Harrison told the gathered group, that when you stand before God, he won't ask how often you went to church or how proper you appeared to your neighbors. He'll ask what you did for the least of these, the hungry, the homeless, the widows and orphans. And all our excuses about appearances and propriety will sound pretty hollow. After, as people mingled over coffee and Rosa's rolls, Margaret found herself surrounded by women offering help, friendship, solidarity. Sarah Morrison introduced her to the others, Ellen Patterson from the general store, whose husband had gone against his mother's wishes to support them. Mary Chen, wife of a Chinese immigrant farmer. Julia Brennan, Tom's wife, who'd raised 8 children and had advice for everything. "Don't you worry about those church ladies," Ellen said firmly. "They've got too much money and too little to do except judge others. Those of us who work for a living, we know the value of helping folks who need it." "I just don't want Harrison to suffer because of us," Margaret admitted. "Harrison's suffering ended the day you walked through his gate," Julia Brennan said bluntly. "I've known that man 20 years, watched him build this ranch with Catherine, watched him bury her and that sweet boy, watched him die inside for 5 years. Last week, I saw him smile, really smile, for the first time since they passed. That's because of you and those children. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth worrying about." The words settled into Margaret's chest, warm and reassuring. Maybe this would work. Maybe they could build a community here, independent of the town's approval. The guests left around noon, promising to return next Sunday, offering help if needed. The ranch hands drifted back to their work. Finally, only the core household remained: Harrison, Rosa, Margaret, and the children. "That was unexpected," Rosa said, gathering coffee cups. "But good, very good." "Mama, can Sarah's daughter Emma come over to play sometime?" Anna asked, her face hopeful. "I'm sure we can arrange that." "And Mr. Cole, can I really help name the foal when it's born?" Luke was practically vibrating with excitement. "Absolutely. In fact, I think Daisy's getting close. Might be any day now." The children ran off to discuss possible names, their voices fading toward the kitchen. Rosa followed with her tray of cups, leaving Margaret and Harrison alone in the parlor. "Thank you," Margaret said softly, "for what you did today. What you gave up." "I didn't give up anything worth keeping." He moved to the window, looking out at his ranch. "But Margaret, you need to understand this isn't over. Murdoch and his faction won't let this go. They'll come after me harder now, try to make an example, show people what happens when you defy them." "Then maybe we should leave, go somewhere else, start fresh where no one knows us." Running never solved anything. He turned to face her. "Besides, this is my home, my ranch. Catherine and Ben are buried on that hill behind the house. I won't abandon them or let bullies drive me away from the only place I've ever belonged. Even if it cost you everything? I already lost everything 5 years ago. Whatever I have now is borrowed time, bonus years I never expected to see. If I spend them fighting for something worthwhile, that's better than the alternative, hiding in this house, slowly suffocating on grief and silence." Margaret understood that. She'd spent months slowly suffocating on poverty and desperation. Standing at his gate, begging for help, had been terrifying. But it had also been the first time in months she'd actually tried to change her situation instead of just enduring it. "All right," she said, "then we fight. But Harrison, promise me something." "What?" "Promise that if it gets too bad, if they threaten your safety or the ranch's survival, you'll consider compromise." I can't be the reason you lose everything your wife helped you build. He studied her for a long moment. I'll consider it. But Margaret, you need to make me a promise too. What's that? Promise you won't leave unless you truly want to go. Not because people are cruel, not because you feel guilty, but because you genuinely want to leave. Can you promise that? It was harder to promise than it should have been. A month ago, she'd been prepared to die if it meant her children survived. Now she was being asked to commit to staying, to fighting, to claiming a place in a world that didn't want her. I promise, she said finally. I won't leave unless I want to. Good. He smiled, and she realized how handsome he was when he smiled. Not just attractive, but warm, alive, present in a way that transformed his whole face. Now, I believe Rosa mentioned something about pot roast for Sunday dinner. Shall we see if it's ready? They gathered for dinner as they had all week. The household at the kitchen table, passing dishes, sharing conversation. But something had shifted today. They weren't just people sharing space anymore. They were a unit, bound by shared struggle, connected by the choice to stand together against opposition. After dinner, after the children were settled with books in the parlor, Margaret returned to the office. The ledgers were nearly complete now, organized and reconciled, ready for regular maintenance. She'd been dreading this moment, when her primary justification for being here ran out, when she'd have to prove her continued worth. Harrison found her there an hour later, staring at the neat columns that represented 3 weeks of work. Finished? He asked from the doorway. Nearly. Another few days to double-check everything. Then it's just daily entries and weekly summaries. She set down her pen. Not enough to justify full employment. Then we expand your duties. The ranch has other needs. Inventory management, supply ordering, payroll oversight, and there's Catherine's library upstairs. Hundreds of books in no particular order. Needs cataloging. You're creating work for me. I'm utilizing available talent. You're good with organization, with systems, with seeing patterns. Those skills apply to more than just bookkeeping. He moved into the room, sat in the chair across from the desk. Margaret, I'm not going to wake up one morning and decide you're not needed here. Stop waiting for that to happen. I can't help it. Every good thing in my life has been temporary. Thomas, stability, happiness, all of it ended. I'm waiting for this to end too. It will end. Eventually. Everything does. His voice was gentle but honest. But it doesn't have to end today, or next week, or next month. Can you accept that? Can you just live in the present without constantly preparing for disaster? I don't know. Can you? The question stopped him. He'd been preparing for disaster too, she realized, living in his grief like armor, keeping everyone at distance so he wouldn't risk caring and losing again. I'm trying to learn, he admitted. These past 3 weeks, having life in this house again, having purpose beyond just maintaining what Catherine built, it's teaching me that maybe survival isn't enough. Maybe actually living is worth the risk of losing again. That's terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. He stood, moved toward the door, then paused. Margaret, I'm glad you came to my gate that day. Glad you had the courage to ask for help. Glad I had the sense to say yes. After he left, Margaret sat in the quiet office, his words echoing in her mind. She'd spent so long thinking of that day as desperate weakness, a mother so broken she'd beg a stranger to take her children. But Harrison saw it differently, saw courage instead of weakness, saw strength in vulnerability. Maybe he was right. Maybe asking for help when you needed it was brave, not weak. Maybe accepting help with gratitude instead of shame was wisdom, not failure. The week that followed was surprisingly peaceful. No threats materialized immediately. The ranch ran smoothly, spring approaching with warmer days and longer evenings. Margaret finished the ledgers and began other projects, cataloging Catherine's extensive library, organizing the ranch's supply inventory, even helping Rosa plan the garden. The children thrived. Luke spent every spare moment in the barn, and when Daisy's foal finally arrived, a spindly-legged filly with her mother's gentle eyes, he was ecstatic. They named her Clover, and Luke appointed himself her guardian and best friend. Anna's chess games with Harrison grew more sophisticated. She'd begun reading strategy books from Catherine's library, applying concepts with a focus that reminded Margaret painfully of Thomas. Sometimes Margaret would watch them bent over the board, dark head and graying head together, and feel something complicated twist in her chest. Gratitude, certainly. Affection, yes. But something else too. Something she wasn't ready to name or examine. Thursday evening, Harrison came in from town with news. He found Margaret in the library, where she'd been alphabetizing books all afternoon. Murdoch called in the loan, he said without preamble. Gave me 30 days to pay the full amount. Margaret's stomach dropped. How much? $12,000. An impossible sum. More money than Margaret had seen in her entire life. Do you have it? I can raise it. Have to liquidate some assets, maybe sell part of the southern range, but I can do it. He leaned against a bookshelf, looking tired. Won't leave much cushion for unexpected expenses, but the ranch will survive. This is my fault. If I hadn't come here, Murdoch's been looking for an excuse to squeeze me for years. I have better land, better water, better everything he wants. This was inevitable. He smiled without humor. Actually, you probably delayed it. He was more cautious about moving against me while Catherine was alive. After she died, I'm surprised he waited 5 years. What happens if you can't raise the money? Then he forecloses, takes the ranch, everything Catherine and I built. His jaw tightened. But that's not happening. I'll have his money. Margaret abandoned her books and moved closer. Harrison, is there anything I can do? Any way I can help? You're helping just by being here, by reminding me what I'm fighting for. Not just land and cattle, but the chance to actually do something good with what I have. He pushed away from the shelf. Come on. Rosa's making fried chicken, and if we're late, Luke will eat all the drumsticks. They walked downstairs together, and Margaret tried to push away the guilt eating at her. Harrison was losing his financial security because he'd helped her. No matter how he framed it, that was the truth. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Margaret sat at the kitchen table with Rosa, drinking tea and watching the older woman knead dough for tomorrow's bread. You're worrying, Rosa observed. How can I not? Harrison's losing thousands of dollars because of us. He's spending thousands of dollars on something that matters to him. There's a difference. Rosa punched down the dough with vigor. That man was dying before you came, senor. Dying slowly, suffocating on grief and loneliness. Money can't fix that. But you and those children, you're bringing him back to life. That's worth more than any number in any bank. I wish I could believe that. Then believe this. I've worked for Harrison Cole for 20 years. I know him better than almost anyone except Catherine did. And I'm telling you, he is happier now, more alive now than he's been since she died. Whatever it costs him, it's worth it to him. Accept that. Margaret wanted to believe she was helping instead of hurting, contributing instead of taking, but guilt was a persistent companion, whispering doubts in the quiet moments. Friday brought unexpected visitors. Margaret was in the garden with Rosa and the children, planning spring planting, when 3 wagons rolled up the drive. She tensed, preparing for confrontation, but Harrison emerged from the barn and his face showed surprise, not concern. Tom, what's this? He called to the foreman, who climbed down from the lead wagon. Got something for you, boss. Well, for Mrs. Lane, actually. Tom grinned. The boys and I, we heard about Murdoch's loan. Heard you might need some financial help, so we took up a collection. He held out a leather pouch. Harrison opened it and stared at the contents. Bills and coins, probably more money than these working men should be able to spare. There's near $800 there, Tom said proudly. Every hand contributed what they could. Some of the townspeople, too, the ones who came for Sunday services. We figured if Murdoch's trying to squeeze you for helping folks, we should help you right back. Margaret felt tears spring to her eyes. $800. These men, who earned maybe $30 a month, had pooled their savings to help defend the man who'd defended her. I can't accept this, Harrison said, his voice rough with emotion. You've all got families, responsibilities, and you've got a responsibility to keep this ranch running so we have jobs, Tom interrupted. Besides, some of us remember when we needed help and got it. My Jenny, she got real sick 3 winters ago. You paid for the doctor, paid for medicine, paid my wages even though I couldn't work for 2 months while I nursed her. This is us paying back. One by one, the other ranch hands stepped forward, each with a similar story. Times Harrison had helped without asking for repayment. Medical expenses covered, Advances given during hard months, debts forgiven when illness or injury struck. You and Mrs. Cole built a reputation, Jack Morrison said. A reputation for being fair, for helping people who needed it, for measuring worth by character instead of bank accounts. We're just trying to live up to that standard. Harrison looked at the pouch in his hands, at the men who'd given what they could, and Margaret saw his throat work as he swallowed hard against emotion. Thank you, he managed finally. All of you. This means more than you know. One more thing, Tom said, pulling a paper from his pocket. Got 23 signatures here from people pledging to buy from Cole Ranch exclusively. They're cutting ties with Murdoch's businesses, the merchants who sided with him, all of it. You stood up for what was right, boss. Now we're standing with you. After they left, Harrison stood in the yard holding the leather pouch and looking dazed. I didn't realize, he said quietly. All those times I helped people, I never thought about it being anything except doing what Catherine would have wanted. I didn't expect anything back. That's why they gave it, Margaret replied. Because you never asked. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them, recognition maybe of what they were building here. Not just a household or an employment arrangement, but something larger. A community based on mutual support instead of transactional exchange. On helping because it was right, not because it benefited you. We're going to survive this, Harrison said, and for the first time he sounded certain. Whatever Murdoch throws at us, we'll survive it. Margaret wanted to believe him. Standing there in the sunlight with the ranch spread before them and the mountains rising in the distance, she almost did. But night has a way of bringing doubts back. That evening, as she tucked the children in, Luke asked innocently, Mama, are we going to have to leave? Why would you think that, baby? I heard Mr. Cole talking about money, about having to pay a lot. What if he can't? What if we have to go back to being hungry? Margaret's heart broke at the fear in his voice. We're not going back to that. I promise. Mr. Cole is handling the money situation, and even if something happened, I'd never let you go hungry again. You promise? I promise. But after he slept, Margaret stood at her bedroom window and wondered if that was a promise she could keep. She had no money, no resources, nothing but the wages Harrison paid her, and the hope that this strange situation would somehow last. Hope was fragile. Experience had taught her that. But sometimes fragile hope was all you had. She watched the stars emerge one by one, distant and cold, and allowed herself to acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Harrison Cole. Not because he'd saved her, gratitude wasn't love. Not because he was wealthy. She'd never cared about money except when lacking it meant starvation, but because of who he was. His quiet strength, his unwavering principles, the way he spoke to her children like they mattered, the way he'd stood before that church and chosen right over easy. The realization should have terrified her. Thomas had been dead less than a year. Loving another man so soon felt like betrayal. But Thomas was gone, and she was still alive, and Harrison made her feel seen in ways she'd never experienced. It was too soon, too complicated, too dangerous to feel this when their situation was so precarious. So she pushed the feeling down, locked it away, and told herself it didn't matter. They had bigger problems than her inconvenient heart. Outside, an owl hooted from the barn. Inside, the house settled around her, and somewhere down the hall, Harrison slept in his own room, probably wrestling with his own demons and doubts. Two broken people trying to build something whole from their shattered pieces. Whether they'd succeed or fail remained to be seen. But tonight, at least, they were trying, and sometimes trying was enough. The realization sat in Margaret's chest like a stone for 3 days before circumstances forced everything into the open. She tried to pretend nothing had changed, tried to maintain the careful distance between employer and employee, but awareness of her feelings colored every interaction. The way Harrison's eyes crinkled when he smiled at something Anna said, the sound of his boots on the porch at evening, the warmth in his voice when he called her name, everything magnified, everything significant, everything impossible. Monday morning brought the crisis no one anticipated. Margaret was working in the office when raised voices erupted from the front yard. She rushed to the window and saw Silas Murdoch climbing down from an elaborate carriage, accompanied by 2 men who looked like hired muscle. Behind them, a wagon waited with official county seals on its side. Harrison emerged from the barn, his face darkening as he saw who'd arrived. Margaret's hands went cold. This was it. Whatever confrontation had been building was about to break. She hurried outside, arriving as Murdoch pulled papers from his coat pocket with theatrical flourish. "Harrison Cole, I'm here to inform you that your loan payment is now overdue. You had 30 days. Those days have expired." Murdoch's voice carried across the yard, ensuring everyone heard. Several ranch hands had stopped work to watch. "It's been 28 days, Harrison said evenly. "I have 2 days remaining." "You had 30 days from the date I filed the acceleration notice with the county, not from when I informed you personally. That was 28 days ago. Your payment is officially late." Murdoch smiled, triumphant. "As per the loan agreement, I'm exercising the bank's right to immediate foreclosure. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises." The words hung in the air like poison. Margaret felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This couldn't be happening. Harrison had been gathering the funds, selling assets, calling in debts owed to him. He'd been so careful, so meticulous. "That's fraud," Harrison said quietly, dangerously. "You deliberately waited to inform me so the deadline would pass while I was still gathering funds. I informed you in accordance with the law. If you failed to track the filing date, that's your oversight, not my problem." Murdoch gestured to the wagon. "I've brought the sheriff and county assessors. They'll be inventorying assets to prepare for sale. I suggest you gather personal items and make arrangements for alternate lodging." "You absolute bastard," Harrison's voice went deadly soft. "You orchestrated this whole thing, pressured people to condemn my household arrangements, then used that manufactured scandal as justification to accelerate the loan, then deliberately obscured the actual due date to ensure I'd miss it. This entire thing is retaliation because I dared to help someone you wanted me to reject. This is business, Cole, nothing personal." But Murdoch's smile said otherwise. "You've been the big man in this county too long. Time someone reminded you that money talks louder than principles." Margaret couldn't breathe. This was her fault, all of it. Harrison was losing his ranch, his home, everything Catherine had helped him build, because he'd shown kindness to a desperate widow and her children. "How much?" she heard herself say. Both men turned to look at her. Murdoch's expression was patronizing. Harrison's was warning. "I beg your pardon?" Murdoch said. "How much does he owe you, exactly?" Margaret's mind was racing, calculating, desperate. $12,347.16, including late fees and penalties. Murdoch recited the numbers with relish. "And if it's paid today, in full, the foreclosure stops?" "Margaret, don't," Harrison started, but she cut him off. "Answer the question, Mr. Murdoch." The banker's eyes narrowed. "If paid in full before the 72 hours expire, yes, the foreclosure would be voided. But Mrs. Lane, unless you've been hiding a fortune under your mattress, I fail to see—" "I'll be back in 1 hour." Margaret turned and ran toward the house, her heart hammering. She took the stairs 2 at a time, burst into her room, and went straight to the small trunk she'd brought with her that first desperate day. At the very bottom, wrapped in an old pillowcase, was the one thing she hadn't sold. The one thing she'd kept hidden even from herself because looking at it hurt too much. Catherine's wedding ring. No, her own wedding ring. She'd told Harrison she'd sold it, but that had been a lie born of pride. She couldn't bear to part with it, couldn't sell the symbol of Thomas's love even when starvation loomed. The ring was simple gold, but old. Her grandmother's originally, passed down through 3 generations. Thomas had been so proud to put it on her finger, said it made their marriage part of a legacy of love. And now she'd have to sell that legacy to save the man who'd saved her. But the ring, while valuable, wouldn't come close to $12,000. She needed more. Needed? Margaret's eyes fell on the dresses in the wardrobe. Catherine's dresses. The silk ones for special occasions, trimmed with lace and hand embroidery worth a fortune. The wool ones of quality fabric. Even the everyday dresses were finer than anything most women in Wyoming would ever own. She grabbed as many as she could carry and ran back downstairs, where she nearly collided with Rosa in the hallway. "Senora, what are you—" Rosa's eyes widened as she saw the dresses. No, you can't. I have to. It's the only way." Margaret kept moving toward the office, where she'd seen Harrison keep the ranch's emergency cash box. "Rosa, please, how much money is in that box?" The one in the bottom drawer? Maybe $300. Emergency funds for, I need it, all of it. Margaret set down the dresses and pulled open the drawer, found the metal box, grabbed it. Her hand shook as she added the contents to her growing pile of desperate assets. Rosa caught her arm. This is insane. Those things won't cover what Murdoch wants. No, but they'll show good faith. They'll prove I'm trying. Margaret met Rosa's eyes, and the older woman saw something there that made her step back. I brought this on him. I have to fix it. You can't fix this alone. Then help me. Margaret's voice cracked. Please, Rosa, help me try. For a long moment, Rosa stared at her. Then she nodded once, decisive, and reached up to unclasp the gold crucifix she always wore, a family heirloom, probably the most valuable thing she owned. Add this, Rosa said, pressing it into Margaret's hands. And wait one moment. She disappeared into her own small room off the kitchen and returned with a wooden box. Inside were gold coins, savings accumulated over 20 years of work. Rosa, no, I can't take your savings. You can and you will. Harrison and Catherine gave me a home, a family, a purpose. This is how I repay that. Rosa's eyes were fierce. Now go. Show that vulture we fight back. Margaret gathered everything and walked outside to where Murdoch stood smugly directing the assessors. Harrison saw her coming, saw what she carried, and his face went white. Margaret, no. Mr. Murdoch. She spread her offerings on the ground between them like a gambler revealing her hand. Here's what I have. This ring is 18th century gold, appraised at $400. These dresses are silk and wool, finest quality, worth at least $2,000 together. This is $300 in ranch emergency funds. Rosa's crucifix is worth $300 at minimum. Her savings? Another $800. That's $3,800. Murdoch looked at the pitiful pile and laughed. And you think that covers a $12,000 debt? No, but it's a start. Margaret's voice was steady now, her decision made. And I have one more asset to offer. I sign a 5-year labor contract, binding and legal, agreeing to work for Mr. Cole at reduced wages until the debt is satisfied. At $15 a week, that's nearly $4,000 over 5 years. Add the ranch hands $800 from last week, and we're at $8,000, $600 total. Still short $4,000, Murdoch pointed out. Then we sell the southern range. Harrison mentioned it was worth $6,000. That more than covers the remaining debt and leaves surplus for operating expenses. She straightened, meeting Murdoch's eyes. I've just assembled payment in full, Mr. Murdoch. The foreclosure is void. Silence fell across the yard. Murdoch's smug expression faltered. Harrison stared at Margaret like he'd never seen her before. That's not how this works, Murdoch sputtered. You can't just what? Gather assets and labor contracts to pay a debt? That's exactly how it works. Margaret's voice hardened. Unless you're saying you don't actually want the money, unless this was never about the debt and always about destroying Harrison Cole because he dared to live by principles you can't understand? The assessors were watching now, clearly uncomfortable. One of them, an older man with an honest face, cleared his throat. Mr. Murdoch, if payment's being offered, it's not proper payment. It's a patchwork of legal tender, valuable assets, and binding labor contracts, Harrison interrupted, finding his voice. All of which are recognized forms of payment under territorial law. You want your money, Silas? Take it. But the foreclosure ends here. Murdoch's face had gone from smug to mottled red. He'd planned this perfectly, orchestrated every detail to humiliate Harrison Cole and seize his ranch. But he hadn't counted on Margaret, hadn't counted on the community rallying, hadn't counted on people fighting back with every resource they could scrape together. Fine, he spat finally. I'll take your pitiful offering. But Mrs. Lane, that 5-year contract is binding. You try to leave, try to break it, and I'll sue you for breach and take everything, including those children of yours. The contract's with me, not her, Harrison said coldly. She works for me. I hold the contract. And if you ever threaten her or her children again, Silas, I'll make sure every rancher, every merchant, every working man in this territory knows exactly what kind of man you are. By the time I'm done, you won't be able to sell a dollar loan to a dying man in the desert. They stared at each other, two men who'd just fought a war in miniature, and Murdoch was the one who looked away first. Have your lawyers draw up the paperwork, he muttered, and get that land deed for the southern range appraised officially. I want documentation." He climbed into his carriage and left, his hired men scrambling after him, the county assessors following with obvious relief at escaping the confrontation. The moment they were out of sight, Margaret's legs gave out. She sank to the ground, suddenly shaking, the adrenaline that had sustained her draining away all at once. Harrison knelt beside her, his hands hovering like he wanted to touch her but didn't dare. "Margaret, what did you just do?" "I saved your ranch." Her voice came out thin, unsteady. Or tried to. "Did I calculate wrong? Is it not enough?" "You just sold your wedding ring, Catherine's dresses, bound yourself to 5 years of servitude, convinced me to sell land Catherine and I bought together." His voice was rough with emotion. That's beyond anything I could have asked. You didn't ask, I gave it." She looked up at him, this man who'd become so important so quickly. "Harrison, you saved my life, my children's lives. You gave us food and shelter and dignity when we had nothing. You stood up to the entire town, risked everything, lost your church and your reputation, all for us. How could I do anything less? Those things were mine to risk. This," he gestured at the pile of her offerings still scattered on the ground, "this is everything you have left of your previous life, your husband's memory, your family's legacy. Thomas is in here." She pressed her hand to her heart. "Not in a piece of metal. And my family's legacy isn't a ring. It's those 2 children who are alive and healthy because you helped us. That's the only legacy that matters." Rosa had appeared with Anna and Luke, both children confused by the commotion. Anna ran to her mother, and Margaret pulled her close, then reached for Luke, holding them both while tears finally came. "Mama, why are you crying?" Luke asked, his small face worried. "Because sometimes being brave is exhausting, baby. And sometimes you cry after the dangers pass because you didn't have time to be scared during it." Harrison stood, moved to gather her offerings carefully. The ring, the dresses, Rosa's crucifix, all of it. He held them like they were precious, which perhaps they were. Not in monetary value, but in what they represented. People choosing sacrifice over safety, love over self-protection, community over isolation. Tom Brennan approached from the barn, other ranch hands behind him. "Boss? We heard some of what happened. Is the ranch safe?" "For now," Harrison said. "Thanks to Mrs. Lane and Rosa and all of you who contributed. We'll have to sell the southern range, tighten operations, but we'll survive." "Then we'll work harder," Tom said simply. "Do more with less. Whatever it takes." The men dispersed back to their tasks, leaving the core household alone in the yard. Rosa went to prepare lunch, muttering prayers in Spanish. Gratitude this time, not curses. The children wandered back toward the barn, drawn by the lure of kittens and the foal. Harrison and Margaret stood facing each other, the morning's drama settling around them like dust after a storm. "You signed a 5-year contract," Harrison said quietly, "binding yourself here even though—" "Even though what?" Margaret challenged. "Even though people judge us? Even though it's complicated? Harrison, I signed that contract because I want to be here. Not because I'm obligated or grateful, but because this place has become home. Because you and Rosa have become family. Because I can't imagine going back to a world where this isn't my life." "Margaret, let me finish, please." She took a breath, steadying herself. "I know it's too soon. Thomas has been gone less than a year. I know what people will say, what they already say, but I also know that grief doesn't follow schedules, and healing doesn't wait for proper intervals. And I know," her voice dropped to barely a whisper, "I know that what I feel for you is real and complicated and probably a mistake, but it's there anyway." Harrison stared at her, and she watched emotions chase across his face. Shock, understanding, conflict, and finally something that looked like relief. "You think you're the only one feeling complicated things?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Margaret, I've been fighting this for weeks. Telling myself it's too soon, too inappropriate, that I'm just lonely and you're just grateful and we're both fooling ourselves. But then you do something like this." He gestured at where her offerings had lain. "And I realize I'm not fooling myself at all. What I feel is real, and I'm tired of pretending it's not." The world seemed to hold its breath. Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. "So what do we do?" she whispered. I don't know. His honesty was painful. We've already scandalized the town. Getting married would just confirm all their suspicions that this was improper from the start. But not getting married means living with rumors and judgment and constant pressure. He looked at her directly. What do you want, Margaret? Not what's practical, not what solves problems, but what do you actually want? She thought of Thomas, of the love they'd shared, of vows made before God and community. Thomas had made her promise, when the fever took hold and he knew he wouldn't survive, that she wouldn't let grief consume her. Live, he'd whispered with his last strength. Find joy again. Don't make my death the end of your story. She'd thought he meant just survival. Now she understood he'd meant more. I want to be happy, she said simply. I want my children to have a father who treats them with respect and kindness. I want to wake up every morning knowing we're safe, we're together, we're building something that matters. And I want... She stopped, gathered courage. I want you. Not because you saved us, but because of who you are. Because you make me laugh. Because you see my children as valuable human beings. Because you stood in front of that church and chose right over easy. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to hope. Harrison closed the distance between them in 2 strides and took her hands in his. Marry me. The words were abrupt, unromantic, perfect. People will say terrible things, Margaret warned. Let them. They'll say I seduced you for your money. I know the truth. You know the truth. That's what matters. Thomas has only been gone 10 months. And he told you to live. You just said so. Harrison's grip tightened. Margaret, we've both lost people we loved. We know how short life is, how quickly everything can be stolen away. Do we really want to waste time we could be happy just because people might judge the timing? The children adore you and are already treating this place like home. Anna calls me Mr. Cole, but she lights up when I walk into a room. Luke asked me yesterday if I'd teach him to ride like a real cowboy. They need a father. I'd be honored to be that for them. Margaret felt tears streaming down her face again, but these were different. Not desperation or relief, but something purer. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Harrison pulled her into his arms, and for the first time since that terrible day when influenza took Thomas, Margaret let herself be held by a man who cared for her, let herself feel safe, let herself believe in the possibility of happy endings even after tragedy. They stood there in the yard, holding each other while the ranch continued around them, cattle lowing in distant pastures, horses nickering in the barn, Rosa singing in Spanish from the kitchen. Life, persistent and beautiful, refusing to be stopped by grief or scandal or small-minded judgment. When? Harrison asked against her hair. Soon, before Murdoch can manufacture new problems. She pulled back to look at him. But Harrison, I won't marry you in secret like we're ashamed. We do this properly, publicly, let everyone see we're choosing this freely. Agreed. He smiled, and she saw in that smile the man Catherine must have fallen in love with. Strong, kind, unshakably principled. We'll do it Sunday, at our ranch service, in front of everyone who stood with us. Tom can officiate. He's licensed to perform marriages. That's 5 days away. Is that too soon? Margaret thought of Thomas's dying words, thought of the months spent slowly starving rather than accept help, thought of standing at Harrison's gate, desperate enough to beg, brave enough to try. No, she said firmly. It's not too soon. It's exactly right. The next 5 days passed in a blur of preparation. Margaret altered one of Catherine's dresses, the green wool she'd worn that first Sunday, making it fit perfectly. Rosa baked enough food to feed an army. The ranch hands built benches in the large parlor and decorated with early spring wildflowers they found in the protected valleys. Anna and Luke were told Saturday evening after dinner when the household gathered in the parlor. Children, Mr. Cole and I have something to tell you, Margaret began, her heart racing. Tomorrow, we're going to get married. That means he'll become your stepfather, and this ranch will officially be our home. Silence. Luke looked confused. Anna's face was unreadable. You mean we get to stay here forever? Luke asked finally. Yes, baby, forever. And Mr. Cole will be like Papa was? Harrison knelt down to Luke's level. Not like your Papa was. I can never replace him, and I won't try. but I'll be here for you. Teach you things. Take care of you and your mama. If you'll let me." Luke considered this seriously. Then he launched himself at Harrison, wrapping small arms around his neck. "Okay, I like you. You're nice." Harrison's eyes closed, and Margaret saw his throat work with emotion as he held her son. Anna was harder. She stood apart, arms crossed, her 7-year-old face ancient with worry. "Anna?" Margaret moved to her daughter. "Talk to me, baby." "Are you forgetting Papa?" Anna's voice was small, hurt. "No, never." Margaret pulled Anna close. "I loved your Papa with everything I had. He was a good man who loved us completely. But he's gone, and we're still here, and we have to keep living. Your Papa told me that before he died, told me not to stop living just because he couldn't be with us anymore." "But what if we forget him? What if Luke forgets what he looked like?" "We won't forget." Harrison spoke gently. "Anna, your mother has told me about your father, how smart he was, how he taught you numbers, how he believed girls could do anything. I'll make sure you both remember him. We'll talk about him, honor his memory. He'll always be part of this family." Anna studied Harrison with eyes too old for her age. "Promise? Promise you won't try to make us forget?" "I promise." Harrison held out his hand. "Your father will always be your father. I'm just hoping to be an addition, not a replacement." Slowly, Anna took his hand. "Okay, but I'm still going to call you Mr. Cole. That's fine. Call me whatever feels right. Maybe someday I'll call you Pa, but not yet. Whenever you're ready, or never. It's your choice." The tension broke. Anna nodded, satisfied, and returned to her book. Luke was already asking questions about the wedding, about whether there'd be cake, about whether the kittens could attend. That night, Margaret lay awake in the blue room one last time. Tomorrow, she'd move her things to the master bedroom Harrison had occupied alone for 5 years. Tomorrow, she'd become Mrs. Harrison Cole. Tomorrow, everything would change again. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt peaceful, certain. This was right, regardless of what anyone else thought. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect Wyoming days when the sky stretched endlessly blue and the mountains stood sharp against the horizon. People began arriving at 9. The ranch hands and their families, the townspeople who'd stood with them, even a few faces Margaret didn't recognize who'd apparently heard about the wedding and come to witness it. Sarah Morrison arrived with Emma and immediately took charge of the children, getting them dressed and settled. Ellen Patterson brought flowers from her greenhouse, early tulips and daffodils that added color to the parlor. Julia Brennan fussed over Margaret's dress, pinning her hair, telling her she looked beautiful. At 10 o'clock, everyone gathered in the parlor. Tom Brennan stood at the front, his weathered face solemn with the responsibility of officiating. Harrison waited beside him, dressed in his black suit, looking nervous for the first time since Margaret had met him. Rosa escorted Anna and Luke to the front, both children dressed in new clothes made from fabric Margaret had purchased with her wages. Then she nodded to Margaret. Margaret walked down the makeshift aisle alone. No father to give her away. He'd been dead 10 years. No family except the children waiting at the front. Just her, making this choice freely, walking toward a future she was choosing rather than accepting. Harrison's eyes never left her face. When she reached him, he took her hands, and she felt the tremor in his fingers that matched her own. Tom opened a worn Bible and began, "Dearly beloved, we're gathered here in the sight of God and these witnesses to join Harrison Cole and Margaret Lane in holy matrimony. This is not an institution to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was established." He continued with traditional words, but Margaret barely heard them. She was focused on Harrison's face, on the emotions she saw there: hope, fear, determination, love. Yes, love. It was there in his eyes, unmistakable and real. "Harrison," Tom said, "do you take Margaret to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" "I do." Harrison's voice was steady, certain. "Margaret, do you take Harrison to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" She thought of Thomas one last time, said a silent goodbye and thank you, and then answered clearly, I do. The rings? Harrison pulled out 2 bands, his own, which he'd worn when Catherine lived, and a new one he'd had made for Margaret. Simple gold like the one she'd sacrificed, but engraved with the date and their initials. They exchanged rings with shaking hands. Tom pronounced them husband and wife. Harrison kissed her gently, respectfully, in front of all these witnesses who'd stood with them against the town's judgment. Applause erupted. Luke cheered. Anna smiled, actually smiled, for the first time that morning. Rosa wiped tears and muttered prayers of gratitude. And just like that, Margaret Lane became Margaret Cole. The celebration that followed was joyful and loud. Rosa's food disappeared rapidly. Someone produced a fiddle and started playing, and before long, people were dancing in the parlor, the house filled with laughter and music and life. Margaret danced with Harrison, with Tom Brennan, with several ranch hands who awkwardly but sincerely congratulated her. She watched Anna dance with Emma Morrison, watched Luke try to teach Clover the foal to dance, watched Rosa beam like a proud mother at a daughter's wedding. This was family, not blood, but choice, not perfect, but real. Late afternoon brought unexpected visitors. A carriage rolled up, and Margaret tensed, expecting more trouble. But the woman who emerged was elderly, elegantly dressed, with kind eyes and a determined set to her jaw. Mrs. Hartford, Harrison said, surprised. I didn't expect— Of course you didn't. I don't accept many invitations these days. Mrs. Hartford approached, leaning on a cane. But I heard about your marriage, and I wanted to come personally to offer congratulations and to set a few things straight. She turned to address the gathered crowd, her voice carrying despite her age. I'm Louisa Hartford. I've lived in Timber Creek 60 years, longer than most of you have been alive. I knew Harrison's parents. I knew Catherine from the day she arrived here as a bride. And I'm here to tell you all that what Harrison Cole has done, helping Mrs. Lane and her children, marrying her despite town gossip, is exactly what Catherine would have wanted. Catherine Cole believed in helping people and doing what was right regardless of what was proper. Harrison has honored her memory better by this action than he could have by 1,000 years of mourning. She fixed her gaze on the crowd, and despite her age, her stare was formidable. Anyone who has a problem with this marriage can take it up with me. And I assure you, I'm considerably more trouble than I look. She smiled sweetly. Now, is there any of that cake left? I came a long way, and I'm hungry. The tension broke with laughter. Mrs. Hartford's endorsement, she was the grande dame of Timber Creek society, wealthier and more established than even the Bancrofts, changed everything. If she approved, if she publicly supported them, the town's opposition would crumble. As evening approached and guests began departing, each offered congratulations and promises of continued support. The community they'd built around them was small but solid, based on shared values rather than social standing. Finally, only the household remained. Rosa took the exhausted children upstairs, leaving Harrison and Margaret alone in the parlor as twilight painted the sky purple and gold. Well, Mrs. Cole, Harrison said softly, how does it feel? Terrifying. Wonderful. Right. Margaret leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. I keep expecting to wake up back in that freezing room with nothing, discover this was all a dream. It's real. You're here. You're mine and I'm yours, and we're going to make this work. People will still talk. Let them. We have each other. We have the children. We have people who matter on our side. He kissed the top of her head. Besides, I've discovered I rather enjoy defying expectations. Margaret laughed, and the sound surprised her. Genuine joy, uncomplicated by fear or desperation. When had she last laughed like that? Come on, Harrison said, taking her hand. Let's check on the children, then I'll show you the sunset from the hill where Catherine and Ben are buried. It's beautiful up there, and I think Catherine would want to know you're here, would want us to include her in this new beginning. They walked upstairs together and found both children already asleep, exhausted from the day's excitement. Luke was sprawled diagonally across his bed, Clover the toy horse clutched in one hand. Anna had fallen asleep with her book open, looking peaceful in a way Margaret had despaired of ever seeing again. They're good kids, Harrison murmured, adjusting Luke's blanket. They are, and they're lucky to have you. Margaret closed Anna's book, marking the page. I'm lucky to have you. We're lucky to have each other. They climbed the hill behind the house as the sun sank lower, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. Two simple headstones stood beneath a cottonwood tree: Catherine Cole, beloved wife and mother, and Benjamin Cole, precious son. Fresh flowers had been placed there recently, probably Rose's work. Harrison knelt and placed his hand on Catherine's stone. Catherine, I want you to meet Margaret. She's become important to me, to all of us. I think you'd like her. She's brave and smart and good with numbers, almost as good as you were. She has two children who needed help, and helping them helped me remember how to live again. His voice roughened. I hope you approve. I hope you understand. I'll always love you, but I'm choosing to love again. And I hope that's what you'd want. Margaret knelt beside him, placed her own hand on the stone. Thank you, Catherine, for building this place, for teaching Harrison to be the man he is, for creating a legacy of kindness that saved my life. I'll try to honor that legacy. I'll try to be worthy of what you started. They sat there as the sun set completely, stars emerging one by one in the darkening sky. Margaret thought about the journey that had brought her here: desperation, begging, accepting help, learning to hope again. Thought about Thomas and Catherine, the loves that were lost but not forgotten. Thought about Harrison and the children and Rosa and the life they were building together from the ruins of what came before. Ready to go back? Harrison asked finally. Yes. Margaret stood, brushing off her dress, Catherine's dress, altered to fit her, a perfect symbol of how they were taking what came before and transforming it into something new. Let's go home. They walked down the hill hand in hand toward the house where lights glowed in windows and smoke rose from chimneys and life waited. Behind them, the graves stood silent beneath their tree, but Margaret didn't feel haunted. She felt blessed, blessed to have had Thomas's love, blessed to have found Harrison's, blessed to still be alive and able to build new joy from old sorrow. In the house, Rosa had left coffee and pie on the kitchen table with a note. For the newlyweds, don't stay up too late. Tomorrow is Monday and there is work to do. Bienvenidos a su nueva vida. Welcome to your new life. Margaret poured coffee while Harrison cut pie, and they sat at the kitchen table in comfortable silence, the kind that comes when words aren't necessary because presence says everything. What happens tomorrow? Margaret asked finally. Murdoch still hates us. The church still condemns us. We've made permanent enemies. Tomorrow we wake up, have breakfast, and keep living. We work the ranch, raise the children, build our community. We prove by our actions that we made the right choice. Harrison reached across the table to take her hand, and we do it together, which makes it considerably easier than doing it alone. Together, Margaret repeated, liking the sound of it. Later, much later, as they lay in the master bedroom, their bedroom now, Margaret listened to the house settle around them. Listened to Harrison's breathing slow into sleep beside her. Thought about the morning she'd walked to his gate, half dead with desperation, prepared to give up her children to save them. She thought that day was the end of everything. Instead, it had been a beginning. The start of a journey from desperation to hope, from loss to love, from barely surviving to actually living. Outside, Wyoming wind sang through the cottonwoods. Inside the Cole Ranch, her home now, truly and completely, held everyone she loved safe within its walls. Two children slept peacefully, no longer hungry or afraid. A man who'd been drowning in grief had learned to breathe again. A housekeeper who'd tended emptiness now oversaw a full and joyful household. And Margaret Cole, lay in the darkness and let herself believe, finally and completely, that sometimes broken things could be mended, that sometimes loss could transform into gain, that sometimes when you were brave enough to ask for help and humble enough to accept it, the universe responded with grace beyond imagination. She'd come to Harrison's gate with nothing but desperation and two starving children. She'd left with a home, a family, a future, and the kind of love she'd thought she'd never find again. Not a replacement for what was lost. Nothing could replace Thomas or the life they'd had. But something new, built on foundations of shared grief and mutual respect and the courage to choose hope, even when hope seemed impossible. As sleep finally claimed her, Margaret's last conscious thought was gratitude. Gratitude for survival. Gratitude for Harrison's kindness. Gratitude for second chances and new beginnings, and the persistent, stubborn refusal of the human heart to give up on love just because love had hurt before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Murdoch wouldn't give up easily. The town would continue to judge. But tomorrow, they'd face those challenges together, as a family, united by choice and commitment, and the determination to build something beautiful from the wreckage of what they'd lost. Tonight, though, there was only peace, only warmth and safety and love. Only the quiet miracle of survival transformed into joy. And that, Margaret thought, as sleep took her, was more than enough. It was everything.